Hey guys, tonight we drift back to the dusty marble shores of ancient Greece. The air hums with cicadas, the sun blazes above whitewashed homes, and the streets of Athens are, surprisingly, quiet. You feel it right away. The entire city seems to exhale around midday. No shouting merchants, no political debates, just the occasional creak of a closing shutter and the soft shuffle of sandals disappearing into homes. It's as if the whole world hits pause just for a nap. You might think ancient Greece was all about chiseled abs, grand debates, and charging into battle in bronze helmets. But if you showed up around noon hoping for some action, you'd be sorely disappointed. In fact, you'd be sweating through your tunic, standing alone in an empty marketplace, wondering whether you took a wrong turn at the Parthenon. Why? Because everyone, and we do mean everyone, was inside, flat on their backs, out cold. You probably wouldn't survive this nap-centric society without embracing the siesta yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere warm, tell me your location and the local time in the comments. Maybe you're napping too. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The noonday sun in Attica hits hard, like walking into an open oven with no off switch. You squint up at the hazy sky and already feel your energy wilt. Down the winding paths of a sleepy fishing village, cats melt into shadows and old women wave you inside before the worst of it hits. By the time the temple bells toll their lazy midday song, even the priests have slipped off their sandals and ducked behind columns for a bit of peace. You trudge past olive trees shimmering in the heat. A shepherd leans against a crumbling wall, arms crossed, eyes shut. His sheep are already flopped over like fluffy rugs. No one's rushing, no one's working. Everyone, including the animals, respects the midday surrender. In homes carved from limestone and clay, shutters swing closed with a quiet clack. Windows are shaded by thick linen cloth soaked in water, cooling the breeze that dares sneak through. Women pad across tiled floors in soft sandals, laying out mats or tucking babies into hammocks, swaying gently in the darkened air. This isn't just a nap, it's an orchestrated retreat from nature itself. You settle onto a low couch in a shaded corner, the scent of baked bread still lingering in the air. Outside, the heat radiates from every stone and wall, but in here, here it's dim and cool and still. A soft breeze touches your face like a whispered promise. Sleep now. Everything else can wait. This was the rhythm of life, set not by clocks, but by the sun itself. Ancient Greeks didn't just nap for pleasure, they were forced into it by their environment. The Mediterranean climate wasn't forgiving, and without air conditioning or iced drinks, your best bet was horizontal and unconscious. But here's the twist, they didn't fight it. Unlike our modern hustle culture, the Greeks fully embraced this daily slowdown. They weren't worried about productivity between noon and 3. Instead, they honored rest as part of life's natural rhythm, like breathing out after breathing in. And here's a fun tidbit. Some scholars believe the very layout of Athenian neighborhoods was designed with nap culture in mind. Streets were angled to maximize shade during midday, and homes often included cool interior courtyards where families could snooze together, surrounded by fig trees and jasmine. You weren't just allowed to nap, you were practically engineered for it. Historians still argue whether this midday lull was universally practiced or more common among the wealthy, but evidence suggests even farmers, covered in sweat and olive oil, took time to stretch out beneath a tree or crawl under a wagon for a quick snooze. Imagine being a potter in ancient Athens. You've been turning clay since sunrise, shaping amphorae while the rooster's still coughing. By noon, your hands are coated in dried earth, and your hair's sticking to your forehead. Do you keep going? No way. You dunk your head in a cool basin, wrap a damp cloth around your neck, and lie flat on the floor beside your kiln. Maybe you dream of Dionysus hosting a wild party in the clouds, or maybe you just snore. And this wasn't considered lazy. Quite the opposite. It was wise, balanced, and in tune with nature. To fight the sun was foolish. To surrender and recharge was noble. You wander back into the sleepy village. Somewhere nearby, a child's clay whistle trills once, then falls silent. An old man stretches beneath a fig tree, a hat tipped over his eyes. Everything is slow. Even time itself seems to curl up and rest. You realize something important. Here, in this forgotten rhythm of a drowsy afternoon, lies a secret modern life tries to erase. That pausing, resting, doing nothing is not wasteful. It's essential. It's ancient. And tomorrow, when you glance at the clock at 2 p.m., you just might think of a sun-warmed street in Attica, a shuttered window, and the slow, sacred silence of a city that remembered how to rest. You wake, or rather, you half-wake, to the soft murmur of cicadas and the tickle of a lazy breeze brushing your cheek. It's still midday in ancient Greece, and the sun, that tyrant in the sky, hasn't budged an inch. If anything, it feels even hotter. Even the shadows look tired. The air has weight. Every movement feels like you're pushing through warm honey. You blink, slowly. There's no rush. There never is during the midday stillness. You sit up from the cool floor of a shaded courtyard. The stone beneath you is still slightly damp from where someone thoughtfully poured water earlier to tame the heat. A jug of diluted wine and a few half-eaten figs rest nearby. Not a feast, just enough to remind. In your stomach, it exists. Your head feels like it's made of clouds and cotton, and that's perfect. The truth is, the heat isn't just uncomfortable, it's immobilizing. The Mediterranean sun during high noon is no joke. In some parts of Greece, temperatures could climb well over 38 degrees Celsius. That's 100 for our Fahrenheit friends, especially in late summer. It wasn't just hard to work in this heat, it was dangerous. You could pass out, or worse, sweat through your only tunic. So what did the Greeks do? They stopped. Everything. Shops closed, schools paused, even courts took recess. People slipped away into homes, temples, barns, anywhere cool and quiet, and just vanished for a few hours. The city didn't die, it slept. This wasn't just a habit, it was survival wrapped in custom. Think of it as ancient air conditioning, but biological. Now, the practical reasons for this pause are obvious. But there's something else here, something harder to define. The stillness becomes sacred. You start to notice the silence, the soft hum of the world, when it's not being pushed and prodded by human hustle. You hear the wind whisper through cypress trees, the occasional bray of a donkey who clearly didn't get the memo. And somewhere distant, a lyre string plucked by a lazy musician waiting for the sun to calm down. In this suspended world, the line between practicality and ritual blurs. Was the midday pause simply a way to not die of heat stroke? Or did it become something deeper, a moment of daily worship to the rhythm of nature? Historians still argue whether this siesta-like tradition evolved purely from climate or whether it held a cultural, even spiritual, dimension. The truth probably rests somewhere between sweat and myth. And speaking of myths, even the gods napped. In Homeric tales, the gods often retreat to Mount Olympus at midday, not just because they're immortal and can do what they want, but because rest was seen as divine. Hypnos, the god of sleep, wasn't some minor footnote. He had wings, a palace, and enough influence to put even Zeus to bed when needed. We'll get to him later, but the point is, naps weren't just for mortals. They were cosmic. But back on Earth, the noon-hour stillness transformed entire cities. Imagine Athens at 1 p.m. The agora, normally filled with shouting, trading, debating, is deserted. Stalls are empty. Stoa pillars cast long, narrow shadows over stone benches no one's sitting on. A lone chicken pecks at a melon rind with no audience. Even thieves take a break. There's nothing worth stealing when everyone's sleeping and everything's locked up. It's like the entire civilization agreed. No crime, no drama, no shouting, just rest. You wander down an alley that smells of old olives and sun-baked clay. A door is ajar. Inside, a family naps side by side. father, mother, child, all breathing in gentle unison. The air inside is thick and cool, carrying the scent of lavender sachets and freshly washed linen, a soft creak of wicker, the buzz of a sleepy fly. Nothing moves with urgency, and it's not just humans. Chickens tuck their beaks under wings, dogs curl into little brown commas beneath shaded porches, goats, those usually hyper little agents of chaos, lie completely still, eyes half-lidded like furry monks. If you're wondering whether this practice affected productivity, well, it did, in a good way. The Greeks worked early in the morning, took this long midday break, and then picked things back up in the cooler late afternoon. In other words, they front-loaded effort, respected the body, then paced themselves for longevity. A rhythm your smartwatch would probably admire if it weren't stuck in Silicon Valley wearing compression socks and fretting about burnout. Modern researchers now recognize this schedule as being in tune with circadian rhythms and core temperature dips. That sluggish, cloudy feeling you get around 2 p.m. Yeah, that's your body begging for what the Greeks already gave it: rest. And just to be clear, this wasn't some hidden pleasure of the upper classes. Even the average worker had a nap carved into their day. Builders, potters, farmers, scribes, it didn't matter. Come midday, you either found shade or found trouble. Of course, not every moment of silence was paradise. Children didn't always nap on command, and not all citizens appreciated being told to stay indoors while their bread still needed baking. But culturally, the nap became a collective act, a shared pause, a truce signed between body and sun. Occasionally, you'd find someone stubborn, a young man trying to impress a girl by delivering grapes in the heat, a foreign merchant unaware of the local do not disturb hours, or a wandering philosopher who believed naps were distractions from the soul's higher pursuit. That last one? He usually changed his mind by midsummer. There's even a half-joking saying scratched into the plaster of one ancient Athenian bathhouse: better to nap than faint in your sandals. And who can argue with that kind of logic? As the sun begins to edge westward, you notice the air shifting. It's subtle. A breeze picks up. The light softens slightly, going from blazing white to a more golden haze. Somewhere, a pot clangs. A door creaks open. A sandal flaps lazily across the floor. The world stirs, slowly. And just like that, the nap ends, not with a bang, but with a stretch. You see a boy wipe his eyes, stumble toward a courtyard, and splash his face in a basin. An old man rearranges his pillow and insists he's still resting, even as he stands up. Laughter echoes faintly as neighbors call out greetings across balconies. Did you sleep? Only a little. Liar. This, then, is the other half of the siesta's magic. Not just the sleep, but the slow awakening, the gentle return to the world. No jarring alarms, no race against time, just the natural rhythm of bodies that know when to rest and when to rise. You yawn. Not because you need to, but because in this world, the very air encourages it. And you can't help but think, maybe they had it right. You step into the drowsy light of the Greek afternoon, your feet brushing against sun-warmed stones that seem to hum beneath your soles. The shutters begin to creak open again, not all at once, more like a polite applause. First one here, then another there, a wooden clatter announcing that the city is slowly stretching back to life. And you wonder, was this nap just a practical break, or something more sacred? You catch the scent of rosemary and baked barley wafting through an open window. Someone's finishing up lunch, or maybe just starting it. Time is soft here, elastic. The midday pause folds life in half, like pita bread, cradling everything in between. Now you walk toward a small whitewashed shrine tucked behind a fig tree. It's simple, just a niche carved into the rock, a statue of a reclining figure with delicate wings folded at his back. You recognize him. Hypnos, the god of sleep. Turns out this wasn't just about beating the heat or digesting your goat stew. For the ancient Greeks, sleep, especially midday sleep, was sacred, a daily return to a state touched by the divine. Hypnos wasn't just a sleepy little side character in mythology. he had his own lineage, son of Nyx, night, and brother to Thanatos, death. Hypnos was powerful enough to soothe both mortals and gods. His touch could bring even the mightiest warriors to their knees, not with violence, but with velvet stillness. There's a quiet respect in that. You can imagine a Spartan warrior, muscles clenched, sword in hand, then slowly drooping like a flower under Hypnos's invisible hand. The only fight he loses that day is with his eyelids, and there's a reason he's depicted with wings. Sleep comes suddenly, quietly, and from above. That soft swoop of exhaustion that settles into your bones. That's him. In some myths, Hypnos lives in a cave where the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, flows, and not even the sun dares shine inside. Poppies bloom at the entrance, their drowsy perfume drifting through the air. You half expect to find a modern mattress company named after him, and actually some have tried, but the Greeks didn't need branding to understand the power of sleep. Some scholars argue that napping at midday wasn't just encouraged by heat or habit, but by an active belief that this was the time Hypnos passed through the mortal world. A holy window when sleep was closer, easier to grasp, like catching a bus that only runs once a day. Miss it, and you're stuck sweating in the sun until dinner. And here's where it gets delightfully weird. There were temples, yes, actual temples, dedicated to dream incubation. You'd lie down, nap in the sacred darkness, and hope to receive divine visions. Ask a question, sleep in the temple, and wait for answers from the gods via your dreams, sort of like spiritual customer service. The most famous of these were at Epidaurus, in the sanctuary of Asclepius, the god of healing. Pilgrims came from all over Greece, laid down in designated areas called abaton, and hoped the god would visit them in sleep. Now imagine this. You've travelled for days with your sore back, your strange rash, or your existential dread. You finally arrive, make an offering, maybe a cake shaped like a liver, just in case the gods are hungry, and then you lie down among other hopeful snoozers in a marble hall that smells like incense and sheep. You close your eyes, and if you're lucky, Asclepius visits your dreams and whispers, "Stop eating raw onions after sunset." Boom. Divine diagnosis. It wasn't just medicine. It was a daily, mystical merging of body and soul. Some thinkers, including certain Pythagoreans, believed dreams at midday were the clearest, the least muddled by the chaos of the night. Your mind wasn't weighed down by the clutter of full sleep cycles, bad dinners, or ominous owls. A nap at noon, that was a direct line to Olympus, baby. And it wasn't just temple-goers or mystics. Philosophers took naps too, though of course they had to justify it with logic. Aristotle once claimed that sleep was the soul's way of processing sensory data. So technically your nap was mental hygiene, like brushing your mind's teeth. Plato, meanwhile, may not have left behind a treatise on napping, missed opportunity, but his dialogues often hinted at the importance of moderation and harmony. What's more harmonious than breaking your day in half with a cozy doze under a fig tree? Still, not everyone agreed. Stoics, those self-denying champions of discipline, probably grumbled through their afternoons, pretending not to enjoy their naps while secretly passing out like everyone else. Because let's be honest, no one is strong enough to argue with a heat wave and a full stomach forever. You sit now at the edge of a public fountain. The water trickles lazily, casting light patterns on the stone. A child nearby is blinking herself awake, face flushed from sleep, curls sticking to her cheeks. An old man mumbles something about a goat in his dreams, then shrugs. Maybe it was symbolic. Maybe it was just a goat. This, you realize, is the other side of ancient wisdom, not just the grand ideas etched in stone, but the quieter customs passed through generations. A shared understanding that rest is not failure, that sleep isn't weakness, it's communion. You stretch your arms toward the now sunken sun, the heat's lifting like a lid pulled off a steaming pot. People are returning to life, but softer, calmer. The urgency of morning is gone. The bustle will return, of course, it always does. But for now, the city breathes gently. as if it too just woke from a nap and isn't quite ready to start thinking yet. And maybe, just maybe, Hypnos is still lingering nearby, one wing outstretched, deciding who gets just a little more rest before the world resumes. The streets of Athens hum once more, but it's a slow hum, like the low murmur of a crowd that knows there's no hurry. As you make your way down a winding alley, past a sleepy cat licking its paw like it's in no rush to be a cat today, you catch sight of something oddly familiar, a figure leaning against a column, eyes closed, chin tilted forward, and mouth just barely open. You squint, is that... Yes, that's Aristotle, snoozing, or at least someone who looks a lot like him. Robes slightly rumpled, scroll clutched loosely in one hand. A single sandal dangling off a toe. It's a cheeky image, but not an impossible one, because while history books love to show you philosophers mid-lecture or dramatically pondering the nature of existence, what they often leave out is this. Many of these brilliant minds probably took regular midday naps, and unapologetically at that. Aristotle, for example, wrote extensively about the functions of sleep. On Sleep and Sleeplessness, he proposed that sleep was a physical necessity caused by the digestion process, pulling warmth inward, cooling the outer limbs. So basically, he thought naps happened because your lunch stole all your heat and knocked you out. Fair enough. And if that logic sounds a little odd, well, it's ancient Greece. Medical theories involved a lot of warm vapors and bodily humours. You're doing great. Still, Aristotle treated sleep with respect. It wasn't weakness, it was maintenance. Just as a lyre needed tuning, the mind needed rest. He saw the brain as a sort of sponge, soaking up impressions, and believed that dreams might help organize the day's intake. If your brain was the scroll, then sleep was the librarian. You glance down the road and spot another robe-clad figure reclining beneath an olive tree. Could that be Socrates? Socrates was famous for his stamina. The man could debate for hours, stand in silence for longer, and apparently drink most of his peers under the table without slurring a word. But there are rumors, even in ancient texts, that Socrates also enjoyed the occasional strategic nap. During the Battle of Potidæa, one of his fellow soldiers reported seeing him stand motionless in the snow, lost in thought, for 24 hours. Honestly, that might have just been an extreme form of zoning out. Historians still argue whether Socrates truly believed in rest or just used it as an extension of deep thought. Was he meditating or was he dozing with dignity? No one's sure. But if anyone could turn a nap into a philosophical exercise, it was him. Even Plato, Mr. Ideal Forms himself, probably took the occasional siesta. Though he never wrote a dialogue titled On the Virtue of Lying Down After Lunch, his academy operated on rhythms that likely included downtime. After all, how can you contemplate the perfect chair if you're too tired to sit in one? And let's not forget Diogenes. Yes, that Diogenes, the one who lived in a barrel, trolled other philosophers, and once told Alexander the Great to move, you're blocking the sun. Diogenes was the original chaotic neutral of philosophy. And you better believe he napped wherever and whenever he wanted. He treated societal rules like suggestions printed on stale bread. To him, sleeping in the street was no different from sleeping in a palace, just flatter. While other philosophers debated the nature of reality, Diogenes curled up in the marketplace, using a melon rind as a pillow and probably snoring through a civic speech. Fringe? Absolutely. But even Diogenes proved a point. The need to rest was universal. Whether you were pondering ethics, mocking emperors, or just trying to survive another sweltering day, eventually your body told you, enough, we nap now. And while we tend to imagine philosophers as floating brains, disconnected from flesh, the truth is, they lived in those hot, sweaty, tired human bodies, just like everyone else. Bodies that needed cool stone floors, fig-heavy lunches, and the kind of sleep that doesn't come with guilt. You pass a public gymnasium now, its walls echoing with half-hearted thuds and laughter. Young men are stretching, wiping their eyes, tossing javelins with the energy of people who just woke up and are trying very hard to look cool doing it. Their teachers sit nearby, looking both proud and half asleep themselves. This is where philosophy often happened, in gymnasiums, among muscles and metaphors. Lessons weren't just about thinking, they were about living. And napping, that was part of the curriculum. Resting the mind to prepare it for the next round of questions, debates, or possibly sandals-based arguments. There's a quiet wisdom in this. In our world, where rest is often seen as laziness and productivity is a badge of honor, the Greeks offer a different model, one where sleeping in the middle of the day wasn't failure, it was strategy. A way to reset the system, refuel the mind and return stronger. Or at least less cranky. And the best part? They didn't even need blackout curtains or weighted blankets or meditation apps with whale sounds. Just shade, silence, and maybe a goat snoring nearby. You pause under a tree and tilt your head back, letting the filtered sunlight play across your face. Somewhere nearby, a few philosophers are arguing about the shape of the soul, their voices sleepy but passionate. One of them yawns mid-sentence. No one calls him out for it. Because here, sleep isn't an interruption, it's a punctuation mark, a comma in the sentence of the day, a breath between thoughts. And you, listener, are right where you belong, in a world that remembers how to stop. You wander back through the dusty afternoon haze toward the center of the city, drawn by the instinctive human pull toward activity, only to find that it's eerily quiet. Again, you'd think this was a ghost town if it weren't for the faint rustle of tunics, the soft clink of ceramic pitchers being set down, and the occasional cough echoing between columns. This is the agora, the heart of ancient Athens, the hub of trade, gossip, legal proceedings, and impromptu lectures about the meaning of virtue. Normally it bustles, now it naps. Even though the sun has begun its lazy descent, the square is still blanketed in a kind of post-nap inertia, a slow, syrupy calm, a silence made of sandals not shuffling, mouths not shouting, and coin pouches not clinking. You glance around. An empty stall with a half-unrolled awning flaps gently in the breeze. A crate of onions sits unattended, probably safe, since no one's hungry enough to steal a vegetable that causes both tears and social exile. There's a pigeon perched confidently on the magistrate's stone seat, like it was elected during the nap, and no one noticed. This stillness is no accident. The agora, like the rest of Athens, functioned on a schedule deeply tied to the body and the sun. Public business usually started early, dawn early. Debates, court sessions, and commercial deals were best held in the morning, when brains were sharp and temperatures reasonable. By the time the sun was overhead, conversations slowed, tempers frayed, and attention spans withered like overcooked lentils. So the agora would empty almost like an unspoken social contract. Let's all step away before someone says something regrettable. The stillness served as both a timeout and a reset button. Historians still argue whether this quiet period was strictly enforced or simply a cultural rhythm everyone naturally obeyed. But surviving records suggest a sharp decline in official proceedings around midday, likely because the people in charge couldn't think straight when their robes were sticking to their backs. You spot a stone bench in the shade and take a seat, feeling the coolness soak into your legs. Across from you, a pair of philosophers lounge under a pergola, one tracing lazy circles in the dust with his sandal. They're discussing ethics, maybe, or olives. It's hard to tell. Nearby, a child rolls a wooden hoop in a tight circle, not really chasing it, just watching it wobble and fall, then starting over. It's the perfect metaphor for this hour. Motion for motion's sake, without urgency or destination. In the mornings, this square would have been electric. Shopkeepers hawking their wares, citizens shouting their opinions, chickens dodging cartwheels, and somewhere, probably, someone trying to sell slightly used scrolls with only moderate philosophical damage. But now, as the heat still clings to stone and skin alike, the city lets itself pause. It's as though Athens collectively agrees we'll think again later. And not all of this was voluntary. The design of the agora itself encouraged this ebb and flow. The long-covered colonnades, the stowers, offered shade, but no breeze. After noon, even the shade turned stuffy. Merchants retreated to interior rooms, shoppers went home, philosophers paused their grand thoughts mid-sentence and picked up again after a nap and a cool rinse. Even the animals played along. Dogs that had been barking at vendors now flopped under tables like furry punctuation marks. Donkeys leaned against pillars like they were on break from carrying the weight of civilization. Honestly, they probably were. Some market stalls remained technically open, mostly for those who didn't need naps or had already taken one. But even then, prices seemed to soften with the heat. You could probably haggle a whole basket of grapes down to a single coin if the seller was too sleepy to argue. And let's talk about the sound, or lack of it. No hammering, no shouting, no pleading in court. Even the birds seemed to sing more quietly, as if respectful of the nap hangover enveloping the city. You lean back, eyes half-lidded, letting the stone embrace you. The rhythm of the city at this hour is hypnotic. You're not doing anything, but neither is anyone else, and in that shared nothingness you find connection. It wasn't just sleep the Greeks were good at, it was the pause, the intermission, the decision to value rest as part of the day's design, not a flaw in it. It makes you wonder, what if we had that? What if your local town square, instead of hosting honking cars and lunchtime power walkers, emptied out at noon? What if your barista said, "Come back after my sacred fig break"? What if emails stopped auto-replying and simply said, "We're all horizontal right now, please try again later"? Modern life could learn a thing or two from the agora's midday hush. You hear a voice now, a low murmur from a shaded corner. A merchant is brushing dust off a display table, preparing to reopen. A philosopher beside him stifles a yawn before continuing a half-formed thought from hours earlier. Something about justice, or possibly cheese. It's unclear. And slowly the square exhales. Not with a bang, but with a stretch, like waking up in public and pretending you weren't asleep at all. You stand and dust off your robes, mentally, if not literally. The city is coming back to life, but softer now, as if the nap gave it a new layer of patience. And maybe that's what this all means. That midday sleep wasn't just for bodies, it was for tempers too, for minds overwhelmed by debates, for hearts carrying grudges, for people who needed to forget just for an hour or two that the world could be loud. So the agora sleeps, and then slowly it dreams itself awake. You meander out of the agora, the chatter behind you rising in a low, echoey hum. Nothing frantic, just people easing back into motion, like a town collectively rubbing its eyes. But now you're walking away from stone and marble, out past the city gates, and into the low, rolling green of the olive groves. The transition is instant. The air smells different, earthier, almost syrupy with sun-heated sap and crushed leaves. The soil crunches softly under your sandals as cicadas buzz like a choir of sleepy sewing machines. Out here, the rhythm is slower. Always has been. You pass a gnarled olive tree, its silvery leaves twitching in the breeze. Beneath it lies a shepherd, arms folded behind his head, sandals kicked off, hat pulled low over his face. A thin strand of hay wiggles from his mouth like it's on a lazy mission to nowhere. He doesn't stir, not even when a goat steps over his leg, bleats softly, then curls up nearby in the shade. You stop, not to gawk, but because this, right here, might be the most authentic nap in all of Greece. The olive groves were the lungs of the countryside, and for thousands of years they've doubled as open-air bedrooms. If the city napped in hidden rooms and shuttered houses, the rural folk did it right here, flat on the land itself. Farmers, shepherds, labourers, they didn't need beds. A patch of grass, a low branch, maybe a worn leather satchel under the head. That was enough. Midday sun overhead, shade underfoot, goats dozing like furry paperweights. It was the kind of peace city folk tried to recreate with scented candles and lo-fi playlists. And it wasn't just farmers, even landowners, visiting their plots to inspect the trees, would bring along hammocks or padded mats. Someone would unpack a clay jar of water, lay out cheese and figs, and once the food was gone, everyone lay back and disappeared into afternoon nothingness. You walk further into the grove where the canopy thickens, dappling the ground in broken light. The deeper you go, the more people you see in various states of horizontal relaxation. An old woman in a blue chiton using a sack of grain as a pillow, two boys who clearly started out wrestling and ended up snoring side by side, a donkey napping so hard its ears twitch in dreams. Out here, nobody pretends not to nap. And why would they? Olive harvesting was exhausting work, hours of climbing, twisting, shaking trees until they surrendered their fruit. It was early morning labor done when the light was soft and the air cool. By midday, your arms were sore, your tunic sticky, and your brain half melted. So when noon came, you ate whatever you had. Usually bread, soaked in oil, a few olives, yes, even after harvesting them. Maybe some leftover lentil stew, if you were lucky, and then you slept, because the body demanded it, and the land allowed it. That's the part modern life forgets. We act like the world is always watching, always judging whether we're doing enough. But the Greeks knew something deeper, that the land itself was a partner, not a clock. The land said, "Enough for now," and they listened. Historians still argue whether rural Greeks had it easier in this regard. City schedules were tied to politics and temples, but countryside life revolved around sunrise, soil, and stomachs. In that sense, the nap wasn't just an option, it was a scheduled event carved into the bark of the day. And here's a fun tidbit. Some rural workers used stones warmed by the sun as makeshift hot pillows. They'd wrap them in cloth and cradle them under their necks for comfort. Others, especially older folk, carried woven mats to unroll beneath the same tree every day, almost like claiming nap territory. Don't touch that spot, that's Demetrius's nap square. Of course, animals napped right alongside their humans. Goats, sheep, dogs, all curled in sleepy clusters. There's even an old saying from Thessaly, "If your goat sleeps, you should too. He knows more about the weather than you ever will." Hard to argue with a proverb delivered by a guy in his 80s wearing one sandal and holding a turnip like it's treasure. You crouch under a tree and lean back against the bark. It's warm, not hot, just sun-kissed. A breeze plays with the grass around your feet. You can hear bees, drowsy ones, bumping into low branches like drunk sailors. And then somewhere off in the distance, a flute begins to play. Not well, but beautifully. Maybe it's a shepherd, maybe a bored kid, but the melody wanders through the trees like a half-remembered dream, threading through the heat, around the goats, and straight into the bones of the earth. In this moment, the nap isn't a break from life. It is life. A rhythm deeper than breath, shared between generations who never owned clocks, never checked inboxes, never apologized for resting. You glance at the sleeping shepherd again. His chest rises and falls slowly. One hand twitches slightly, chasing something in a dream. Maybe he's walking through a market in a toga. Maybe he's just eating an especially juicy pear. The important part? He's somewhere else, and the world is okay with that. You lie back, feeling the soft press of grass beneath you. The branches above sway in rhythm with your breath. Around you, the grove hums, not loudly, not urgently, but enough to say you're allowed to stop. And in the olive grove, everything does. You stir beneath the olive tree, letting the dappled sunlight blink across your eyelids like it's apologizing for waking you. The breeze hasn't changed, still soft, still warm, still whispering stories from 1,000 afternoons ago. You stretch, not because you need to, but because everyone else seems to be doing it. The shepherd rubs his eyes and mutters something to his goat, who pointedly ignores him. The two boys have vanished, probably sprinting toward a stream now, splashing the last of their dreams out of their hair. You stand and start back toward the village, passing by more of those low-slung homes you've come to recognize, thick-walled, modest, shaded. From the outside, they all seem alike. White stone, low doors, roof tiles that have seen more summers than most of their owner, wuniers. But step inside and you realize something extraordinary. These houses were made for naps. Every corner, every material, every design choice seems aimed at one goal, keeping you cool, quiet, and horizontal between noon and 3. You duck through a doorway and into a shaded home where the air shifts instantly. It's cooler, not cold, not sharp, just gentler, as if the temperature itself is trying not to wake anyone. The walls are thick, built from limestone or mud brick, designed not for looks but for insulation. They don't fight the heat, they outlast it. Inside you hear nothing at first, then the slow creak of a rope hammock, the whisper of a fan of reeds stirring the air, the faint drip of water from a ceramic jug kept in the dark for freshness. You're not alone. In the back room, a grandmother lies curled on a wooden bench with a pillow of stuffed wool beneath her neck. A child naps nearby, his thumb still wedged in his mouth. A man snores from behind a woven curtain, sandals poking out. There's a kind of architectural honesty here. These homes weren't built for grandeur, they were built for living. And a big part of living in Greece? Napping! Take the andron, the men's room. It wasn't just for banquets and debates. During the day, it doubled as a resting chamber, cool and quiet, often separated from the bustle of the kitchen. Thick curtains would be drawn across the doorway, shutting out the light, and the men would lie on couches, not like kings, but like sweaty dads who ate too many lentils. Meanwhile, the gynaikon, the women's quarters, often had fewer openings to the street, meaning cooler air and better protection from the heat. It was the ideal space for tending to children, spinning thread, or letting all that go for just a little while to lie back and close your eyes. And the courtyard, that inner courtyard. It was the heart of the house. Open to the sky, shaded by fabric or vines, maybe even a small fig tree growing from a cracked corner. It was where you'd sit and eat, wash your face, read a scroll, or nap on a woven mat while watching clouds drift lazily past the edges of the world. Even the furniture was nap-friendly, low couches with angled backs, wide benches that doubled as beds, stools that could hold up a bowl of grapes or a sleepy toddler, depending on the hour, and lighting, not a problem. During the day, most people kept shutters tightly closed, not just for privacy, but to block out the infernal sun. Some even soaked linen in water and hung it over doorways to cool the incoming breeze. Early swamp cooler. Works like a charm. Historians still debate whether these home designs were intentional or simply evolved with the climate. Did the Greeks build nap-ready homes because they loved napping, or did they love napping because their homes practically begged for it? Probably both. What we do know is that comfort was taken seriously. The Greeks were practical thinkers but not Puritans. They didn't equate discomfort with virtue like some other cultures did. If a stone bench hurt your back, you padded it. If your house got too hot, you designed it better. If you were tired, you lay down. No guilt, no apologies. And not just in homes. Temples and public buildings had their shady corners too. A wide stoa might offer a stone bench just cool enough for a merchant to sneak in a 10-minute doze before resuming his pitch about fish sauce or goat cheese. You know, essentials. It wasn't uncommon to see public figures recline during a pause in duties. An orator, exhausted after hours of arguing about whether taxes should be paid in olives or grain, might excuse himself to sit beneath a portico and promptly fall asleep mid-toast. Even the bathhouses had quiet zones. After a good steam and a scrub, what better way to dry off than to wrap yourself in linen, flop onto a cool bench, and let the breeze do the rest? And let's not forget rooftops, flat, open, often lined with storage pots or drying herbs, but also the occasional blanket or mat. On particularly warm nights or in cramped homes, you'd head up there and sprawl beneath the stars, counting constellations between snores. You exit the shaded home and blink against the brightness outside. The village is stirring again. Pots clink. Bread is needed. Chickens begin their usual petty squabbles in the dust. But everywhere you look, there's evidence that the nap happened, that it mattered. It's in the ruffled hair, the half-laced sandals, the slow movements of people easing back into the day like their limbs are still asleep. And honestly, they look better for it. You pass a group of old men playing a board game in the shade. One gestures to a younger man and says something with a smirk. The younger man laughs and yawns at the same time. No one mocks him. They all nod as if to say, "A good nap, same here." You turn toward a side alley and pass another open doorway. A woman is sweeping her floor with one hand and balancing a toddler on her hip with the other. The child is blinking heavily, head wobbling like a sleepy owl. She gently sets him down on a cushion by the wall, where he curls like a kitten. No bedtime battles here, just rhythm, the kind of rhythm you can build a civilization on. You've followed the nap trail from olive groves to shaded courtyards, from goat herders under fig trees to philosophers flopped over scrolls. But now your journey turns toward a quieter delight, food. And not the kind that makes you leap out of your seat in excitement. No, this is the kind of food that seduces you into reclining and sighing deeply, the kind that whispers, "You know what would go great with this? A nap." You walk past a family gathered around a low table in the courtyard, their plates half empty and their conversation slowing into that familiar post-lunch hush. Someone wipes their mouth with a cloth, someone else leans back and fans themselves with a palm frond, and someone, likely the smartest one, slips away and disappears behind a curtain. Gone. Probably asleep already. Meals in ancient Greece weren't just social, they were strategic, especially mesēmbria, the midday meal. It didn't just fill the belly, it signaled the beginning of the great afternoon wind down. So what was on the menu? Start with bread, always bread. Thick, chewy loaves pulled from clay ovens, often made from barley, the grain of the humble and the hearty. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling, and when dipped in olive oil and paired with salty cheese or mashed legumes, it became comfort food of the highest order. Then there were figs, fresh, sticky sweet, and bursting with sun-warmed sugar. Bite into one and it's less like eating and more like exhaling. Figs practically require you to sit down afterward. There'd be a few olives, naturally, maybe some smoked fish, maybe a drizzle of honey, if it had been a lucky day at market. And of course, wine. Not the kind of wine that gets you dancing, the kind you dilute heavily with water, 3 parts water to 1 part wine, a gentle buzz designed to take the edge off the heat and send you softly spiraling towards slumber. Historians still debate how heavily the average Athenian relied on this diluted wine as a nap aid. Some argue it was ceremonial, others say it was as casual as modern iced tea. One thing's certain, it worked. A light meal, a little wine, and bam, you're halfway horizontal whether you plan to be or not. And remember, they didn't eat this meal with one eye on their sundial and the other on a scroll of emails. The midday table was a place to exhale. A place where chewing slowly wasn't just polite, it was necessary. You couldn't rush it. You couldn't even digest properly if you jumped up too quickly. There's an old saying, possibly invented by a baker, possibly just common sense, that went, "Eat standing and your food runs after you. Sit, eat, linger, then nap. That's the cycle." You pass another home now, this one with a young man stretched out on a shaded bench, hands folded on his chest like he's preparing for a very dignified haunting. His face is flushed slightly, not with embarrassment but with fullness, the kind of warmth that only comes from too much sun and just enough lentils. Inside the house, a woman is washing up, clay plates clinking softly, water sloshing into basins. Even the act of cleaning after lunch has a certain sleepiness to it, as though the house itself is winding down. And here's something quirky. Some Greek households believed that certain herbs could promote restful naps after meals. Sprigs of thyme, marjoram, or chamomile might be burned, brewed, or even stuffed into pillows. Not strong enough to knock you out, but just aromatic enough to nudge you toward surrender. And surrender is the right word. Because post-lunch napping wasn't resisted, it was embraced, it was expected. People didn't fight to push through the fatigue. They welcomed it like an old friend showing up with a soft cushion and zero judgment. Even public officials were known to build their schedules around the midday lull. You wouldn't expect to see a judge holding court in the blazing sun after a plate of lentils and a cup of watered wine. That would be asking for disaster. At best, they'd doze off mid-testimony. At worst, they'd sentence someone to goat duty because they misheard the charge. Instead, business paused, debates paused, life paused, and the pause was fueled, quite literally, by lunch. You reach the edge of the village now where the farmland starts again. A farmer waves at you with the slow, sleepy enthusiasm of someone who just finished both a meal and a nap. He's got a basket on his hip, filled with what looks like cucumbers and exhaustion. His face says, "I'll plant these later, or maybe tomorrow. Who knows?" This rhythm wasn't unique to one Knee Town. Across the Greek world, from the rocky coasts of Attica to the lush hills of Thessaly, people moved to the beat of their bellies and their bodies. Noon meant food. Food meant rest. And rest meant a society that didn't burn itself out by pretending the sun could be ignored. Modern diets talk a lot about energy, how to maintain it, boost it, manage it like a fragile bank account. But the Greeks weren't playing that game. They understood something we often forget, that slowness is nourishing too, that a full stomach wants stillness, not spreadsheets, and that a plate of grapes, a chunk of goat cheese, and a shaded spot to nap afterward might be the closest thing ancient Greece had to therapy. You stop beneath another olive tree and sit for a moment, the breeze tugging at your tunic, your eyelids heavy once again. You haven't done anything particularly strenuous, but that's the point. Here, life is lived in rhythms, not peaks and crashes, just gentle waves. Eat, rest, repeat. And in that repeating, a kind of wisdom that the body knows what it needs, even when it's just a nap. The meal is behind you now, and the soft haze of digestion has settled in. The village hums with its usual post-lunch lull, but your mind wanders, not to politics or pottery or scrolls, but to the gods. Because if there's one thing ancient Greeks were brilliant at, besides inventing democracy and perfecting yogurt, it was wrapping every part of daily life in myth. And yes, that includes naps. You pass a small roadside shrine and notice the statue inside isn't one of the usual suspects. Not Zeus with his thunderbolt or Athena with her war-ready wisdom. No, this one is reclining, peaceful. Wings curled delicately behind his shoulders, one hand outstretched, as if offering not judgment, but a pillow. It's Hypnos, god of sleep, and just behind him, barely carved into the marble, barely peeking out from the shadows, is his twin brother, Thanatos, god of death. They were close in mythology, sometimes indistinguishable in early texts. Sleep and death, twin siblings, one temporary, one eternal, a little grim, sure. But the Greeks didn't fear this pairing, they understood it. Sleep was a small, daily version of death, a letting go, a drifting into mystery. But it wasn't dark or morbid, it was sacred, necessary, a divine appointment you didn't miss. Hypnos wasn't some fringe figure either. In the Iliad, he's the only one able to lull Zeus himself to sleep. Think about that, a god so powerful he could knock out the king of Olympus just by being nearby. That's the level of nap energy we're talking about. And he lived in style. According to Hesiod and other poets, Hypnos dwelled in a cave so deep and silent that not even the sun's rays dared enter. The river Lethe, the one that made souls forget their lives, flowed past its entrance, and poppies bloomed in wild clusters all around. No rooster crowed, no door creaked. It was a soundless kingdom, where even dreams walked on tiptoe. Historians still argue whether this cave was ever tied to a real-world location, or if it was purely symbolic, a kind of poetic embodiment of what sleep felt like. But even if it never appeared on a map, everyone in ancient Greece knew where it was. Inside you. That moment, just after a good lunch, when your limbs go heavy and your thoughts turn fuzzy and sweet. That's Hypnos arriving, brushing the back of your neck with invisible fingers, not commanding you to sleep, just inviting. And you accept. In many myths, Hypnos isn't just sleep bringer, he's a helper, a healer, a plot device, sure, but one who operates gently, often in service of peace. He doesn't storm into rooms or smite the wicked. He just waits for your eyes to close. He shows up when warriors are weary, when mothers are grieving, when kings have raged too long. And not surprisingly, Hypnos is associated with night, but also with midday, because in a land where the sun rules the sky with ferocity, even gods know there's wisdom in taking a break. You continue your walk past the shrine, your thoughts looping gently around this idea that gods napped. And if the gods could nap without shame, surely you could too. But Hypnos wasn't the only divine sleeper. Even Zeus, king of thunder and dramatic family disputes, was known to take the occasional snooze. In one tale, Hera tricks him into falling asleep so she can meddle in a battle. How? She seduces him with sweet words and the help of Hypnos, who flutters by and does his thing. Boom. Out cold. The king of gods, laid flat by a whisper and a warm breeze. And then there's Hermes, the messenger god, who was known for slipping between the worlds of the living and the dead, and between waking and sleeping. Some cults even invoked Hermes before naps, asking for protection during dreams, sort of like a divine bouncer to keep nightmares at bay. And then there's the realm of Oneiroi, the dream spirits. Morpheus, Phobator, and Phantasos, each one responsible for a different type of dream, human, animal, and inanimate. These weren't just shadows of the mind, they were beings with their own agendas. Some brought comfort, others carried warnings. If you've ever jolted awake from a dream about being chased by an angry goose in a toga, you might have Phobator to thank. In ancient times, dreams were messages. Naps weren't just rest, they were reception. You went to sleep hoping for clarity, for insight, maybe even a divine hint about what to do with your goat herd or your rebellious son. Temples like those of Asclepius, the god of healing, had special rooms, Abaton, where people would lie down after rituals and wait for a vision, a dream diagnosis. You'd bring offerings, purify yourself, then nap in a sacred space and hope the god showed up in your sleep with medical advice. Modern doctors don't tend to recommend that method, but you can't deny its charm. And maybe, just maybe, there's something to it. When you're curled up in a quiet room, the heat outside muted by thick walls and linen drapes, your stomach content, your limbs soft with gravity, that's a sacred state. You're closer to the mystery of things, to the part of you that listens rather than talks. You're not dead, you're not gone, you're just elsewhere, just enough to hear what the gods might whisper when they think you've finally shut up long enough to listen. You pause beside another statue now, this one of a reclining lion. Not divine, not mythical, but proud. Even he's resting, because in this world, sleep isn't escape. It's devotion. The village fades behind you again, and the heat settles into its usual mid-afternoon hum. Less fierce than noon, but still enough to make your clothes cling and your thoughts swim. You follow a winding path that narrows between two worn stone walls. Fig trees lean in overhead. The breeze carries a sweet, fermented scent. And soon, something stranger, silence with intention. You're heading toward a temple, not one of the giant marble behemoths where gods thunder down judgment, but a softer place, an Asclepian, a sanctuary of healing. Here the stone is warm and smooth, worn down by generations of sandaled feet and whispered prayers. You walk through a vine-draped archway and into a courtyard filled with fragrant herbs, sage, laurel, and something like lavender, its scent so strong it makes your shoulders drop. A woman in white robes offers you a cool cup of honeyed water. You nod, drink, and follow her into the sleeping chambers. She doesn't say a word. She doesn't have to. This isn't a place of words. This is a place of dreams. You've entered the realm of dream incubation, one of the ancient world's most fascinating, and let's be honest, slightly surreal practices. People from across Greece and beyond came here not just for medicine, but for messages. Divine guidance delivered not through scrolls or speeches, but while snoring gently beneath a blanket. The process was formal. You didn't just wander in and flop down. First, you purified yourself. bathing, fasting, offering coins or cakes. Then you performed rituals, sometimes guided by a priest. Only then did you lie down in the abaton, a sacred chamber where you were expected to fall asleep and, hopefully, receive a vision from Asclepius, the god of healing. And here's the part that would make your sleep tracker short-circuit. The dream was the diagnosis. If you dreamt of snakes, sacred to Asclepius, it was usually a good sign. If the god appeared and touched you or performed a dream surgery on your leg or eyes or heart, the belief was that you'd wake up actually healed. And sometimes people did. Historians still argue whether these were psychosomatic effects, placebo miracles, or the results of days of ritual and suggestion. But the fact remains, people walked away from these temples with their symptoms improved, and they believed it was because of what happened in their sleep. Some left behind thank you tablets carved with descriptions of their dreams and the healing they received. You can still see some of them in museum collections. I came with a stiff neck. The god appeared and cracked it like dry bread. I woke up without pain. Short, simple, effective, and honestly, kind of relatable. Of course, not every dream made sense. Just like today, you might end up with something absurd. One man dreamed a dog licked his foot and he woke up pain-free. Another dreamed of vomiting up an eel and was cured of stomach pain. Freud would have a field day. But the point wasn't logic. The point was transformation. You entered tired, wounded, or lost. You came out after a nap, mind you, with insight, direction, sometimes even peace. This belief that sleep could be a spiritual hotline wasn't isolated. Egyptians, Persians, and Mesopotamians had their own versions. But the Greeks, eeks, they gave it structure, temples, protocol, snake symbolism, classic Greek. And if you're wondering, yes, actual snakes lived in these temples, not venomous ones, just slithering mascots of the god of medicine. Imagine trying to nap while a lazy snake glides across your toes. If you don't leap up screaming, congratulations, you're healed and officially chill. But not all dream incubation happened in big temples. In smaller towns, local healers might create their own sacred napping spots, tiny rooms perfumed with herbs, with low ceilings and dark curtains to mimic the cave of Hypnos. People believed that healing dreams could happen anywhere the divine chose to appear. All you had to do was listen. And naps were the perfect medium, not as deep as night sleep, not as chaotic, just long enough to dip your mind beneath the surface and see what swam up. Some said midday dreams were clearer, purer, like catching fish from a still pond instead of a stormy sea. You recline now on a low stone bench, your own limbs heavy from walking, your breath slowing to match the pace of the sanctuary. All around you, others lie in similar positions, some with hands folded on their stomachs, some curled like question marks, all wrapped in silence. Someone murmurs in their sleep, someone else snores softly. You close your eyes, just to rest them. And in that space between waking and sleep, your mind floats free. You're not dreaming, not yet, but you're open, aware. Listening to the echoes of ancient prayers, of feet on warm stone, of poppies brushing against windowsills. Somewhere in the distance, a flute begins to play again. It always does, and maybe this is what the ancients knew best, that not all answers come through effort, that sometimes wisdom arrives when you stop chasing it, when you lie down, when you release the noise, when you sleep. You might not get a snake massage or a divine dream surgery tonight, but you might get stillness. And for the Greeks, that was healing enough. You leave the sanctuary slowly, like walking away from a warm bath, reluctant, toes dragging, head still swimming in that post-nap soup of softness and haze. The sun has dipped just enough to cast the ground in long shadows, stripes of light and dark stretching across worn cobblestones like the city itself is yawning. Down the slope, past fields and sleeping fig trees, lies the sea, and beyond that the scent of salt and tar and roasted garlic. You follow your nose. You're heading toward the harbour, not for trade, not for drama, but for another, often overlooked chapter in Greece's grand tradition of snoozing sailors. Now, the sea and naps don't seem like the most natural pair. After all, triremes, those narrow, lightning-fast Greek warships, were packed shoulder to shoulder with sweaty, yelling men rowing furiously in unison. If you've ever tried napping next to someone loudly grunting in rhythm, you know it's not ideal. But even rowers needed rest. And during shore leave, napping became an essential ritual. Not just to recover from rowing until your arms felt like boiled noodles, but to claim a bit of quiet after days of cramped quarters, swinging hammocks and shouting captains. You spot a trireme bobbing lazily near the docks, its painted eye gazing out over the Aegean like it's in a daze. On the pier, several sailors are sprawled out in positions that suggest they started a game of dice and then just gave up halfway through. One man snores into his sleeve, another is using a coil of rope as a pillow, practical if not exactly ergonomic. A third has clearly passed out in the shadow of a wine cart, probably more grape than man at this point. You chuckle, but it's not mockery, it's recognition. Because you've been there, maybe not drunk on watered wine, maybe not draped in a toga, but you know what it means to just give in. To lie down in the nearest patch of shade and say, no more. And on the sea, napping was more than indulgence, it was tactics. Triremes operated on tightly coordinated shifts, especially during long journeys or war campaigns. You'd row for a chunk of time, sometimes hours, then sleep in short shifts in cramped bunks or right on the deck. Midday, if the wind was low and the sun too sharp, captains often gave rest orders, not because they were kind, they usually weren't, but because heatstroke was bad for morale. So imagine it, 40 men, glistening with salt and sweat, collapsing into nap piles on the deck. Shields used as sunshades, helmets tilted over eyes, the rhythmic creak of water against wood becoming a lullaby. Even the officers weren't immune. Strategoi, naval commanders, were known to pace the deck at dawn and then vanish for hours around noon. Where did they go? Into their private quarters for rest, often emerging refreshed, slightly rumpled, and still pretending they hadn't just drooled on a scroll. Historians still debate how much rest was actually built into naval routines. Some argue it was entirely pragmatic. Sailors napped when the sea allowed it. Others believe there was an unspoken code. If you didn't rest when you could, you'd collapse when you couldn't afford to. A trireme was nothing without its rowers, and rowers were nothing without functioning backs and brains. So, yes, naps mattered. Sometimes they were stolen in 30-minute bursts. Sometimes, if docked or becalmed, they sprawled for hours under sailcloth, stretched over the deck like a makeshift tent. And don't forget the cargo ships, the merchant vessels, less urgency, fewer drums beating time, and way more nap potential. These were the Cadillacs of ancient sea travel, slow, steady, and often crewed by men who knew exactly how to tie a knot in a hammock. Below deck, amid amphorae of oil and stacks of grain, you'd often find sailors snoozing in slings, swaying gently with the sea. Some even brought their own sleep stones, smooth river rocks they'd tuck behind their necks. Ancient memory foam, if you will. You pass one such ship now, ropes creaking, a gull perched proudly on the mast, like it owns the whole world. A sailor waves lazily at you from his perch on a barrel. His eyes are half-lidded, his grin soft. He's in that post-nap glow that only comes from sleeping within arm's reach of both salt water and baked fish. He gestures at the horizon, then at the sun, then pats the spot beside him. You sit. Because what else can you do? The harbour has settled into that late afternoon lull where everything moves in slow motion, nets are piled, fires are lit, cats emerge to beg, and sailors stretch not like warriors preparing for battle, but like men who've just rejoined their bodies after a good long float. And it's in this moment, surrounded by ropes and seagulls and the soft murmur of sea-tired men, that you understand. Napping wasn't confined to land. The sea demanded it, encouraged it, made it sacred, because when you spend your life swaying on the edge of storm and silence, of Poseidon's tantrums and Zeus's whims, Sleep becomes your anchor, your pause, your way of saying, I am here, I am whole, and for now, I rest. So you rest too, just for a moment. The sea will wait. You wake with your cheek pressed against sun-warmed wood, the creak of the dock beneath you sinking with the slow rhythm of the waves. A cat is sniffing your sandal like it's a treaty offering. Somewhere nearby, someone is slicing something that smells suspiciously like anchovies. You blink, the world is back, but it's different now, more alive. And that's not just because your limbs have untangled from their accidental nap knot. It's because the entire town seems to be stirring from the same soft fog. The collective post-siesta resurrection has begun. You step off the dock and wander toward the open field behind the gymnasium, the palestra. There's movement now, not bustling exactly, more like an exhale turning into a stretch. Young men emerge from side doors, robes tossed over shoulders, hair still mussed from the floor, or bench, or wherever they last flopped down. They squint at the sky, scratch their arms, and blink in that same confused way everyone does when waking from a nap that was just a little too good. Then, without ceremony, they start warming up. Not with stretches or jumping jacks, those hadn't been invented yet. No, this was pure, raw, Greek reanimation, slapping limbs, jogging in place, flexing like they're trying to remind their bodies who's in charge again. One slaps his own chest like it's a horse refusing to gallop. Another yawns so wide his friend tosses a fig at him. This is the after-nap gym hour, and it's a spectacle. In ancient Greece, physical training wasn't just for soldiers. It was part of everyday life for young citizens, especially in Athens. Boys and men trained together daily, wrestling, running, discus throwing, long jumping, and occasionally showing off more than absolutely necessary. And no surprise here, naps were part of the routine. You'd train hard in the early morning, break for lunch, then take a nap to recover and reset. By late afternoon, once the sun had softened, you returned to the palestra for another round. Sandals kicked off, sand dust stirred, muscles flexed. The whole space vibrated with energy, equal parts competition and flirtation. Yes, flirtation. Let's not pretend. The Greek gymnasium was where young men paraded their strength, elegance, and occasionally their ability to backflip without pulling something. If Instagram had existed back then, the palestra would have been full of shirtless slow-motion replays set to lyre music. You lean against a column, watching as two men begin a wrestling match. It starts slow because everything does post-nap. They circle each other like sleepy panthers, yawning, stretching, cracking their necks. One lunges, the other sidesteps. They both chuckle. No one's taking this too seriously. Not yet, but give it time. Because this is how the Greeks balanced their day. The nap wasn't the full stop, it was the semicolon. It allowed them to restart stronger, sharper, cleaner in thought and in footwork. Even Aristotle encouraged physical activity after mental work, and vice versa. He believed the body and mind were a team, not two opposing forces. So while you might have spent your morning discussing the metaphysics of chairs, your afternoon was likely spent throwing a javelin and contemplating whether that chair could dodge one. Historians still argue whether the average Athenian exercised daily or if this was more of an upper-class ideal. But the nap-to-gym pattern shows up again and again in texts, artwork, and even the layout of cities. You weren't just expected to be smart, you were expected to be balanced. And naps? They kept the scale even. The gymnasium had its own rhythm. Morning, cool air, sharp thoughts, fast sprints. Noon, shut everything down before your brain cooks. Afternoon, come back, recharged and sunburned, ready to move. You watch now as more men gather. Some older, teachers, philosophers, past their prime, but still surprisingly nimble. They nod at each other like old warriors who once leapt higher than they probably did. One sits in the shade and starts discussing poetry with a student mid-push-up. Another pulls out a reed flute and starts playing a sleepy tune, entirely inappropriate for high-energy training, but absolutely perfect for massaging your post-nap brain back into coherence. And in the middle of it all, laughter. Real, hearty, nap-fueled laughter, because everyone's just a little loopy. Not drunk, not dizzy, just soft around the edges. It's hard to take yourself too seriously when your hair's sticking up from floor sweat and your limbs are still deciding what century it is. Someone stumbles, someone slips, someone flips a discus like it's a pancake. And no one minds, because the gymnasium isn't just for strength, it's for returning, for reconnecting, for shaking the sleep from your shoulders and saying, okay, let's do this again, but slower this time. You step into the sand and feel its warmth under your toes. A young man runs past you, tosses you a smile, then face plants into the soft earth with a thud that echoes across the courtyard. He doesn't move, you wait a beat. Then his friend walks over and says, give him 5 minutes, he's still rebooting. Classic. And suddenly you realize this isn't just exercise, it's ritual. The nap is the sacred break. The gymnasium is the return to self. Together they make a day feel full. Not crowded, full. And in that fullness, the Greeks found something we're still chasing. Not more, not faster, just enough. You leave the gymnasium just as the sun hits that buttery angle, warm gold washing over rooftops, casting long, sleepy shadows that crawl like syrup through the streets. The heat is finally breaking, not gone but loosened, like a grip unclenching. You can hear the sound of ceramic cups clinking again, and something else too. Laughter. Not the wild belly kind, but the slow, communal chuckles of people settling back into each other. You're headed to the market stalls, the place where the city breathes its daily gossip, where vegetables are over-inspected, coins are dramatically counted, and someone is always accusing someone else of watering down the wine. Earlier, just before noon, this place would have been alive, frantic even, fishmongers yelling over the aroma of salt and scale, housewives arguing over bean prices like they were state secrets, philosophers trailing behind, muttering about ethics while shopping for cheese. The agora, alive with the unmistakable sound of ambition and garlic. But when you passed through here earlier, just a few sections ago, remember, it was a ghost town. Stalls empty, curtains pulled. Even the chickens gave up pecking and flopped onto their sides like tiny, feathery anarchists. Now, the agora is stretching. Stalls are reopening, not with a bang, but a sigh. Merchants unroll awnings with lazy flicks of the wrist. A boy fans coals under a small grill, sending up a puff of sweet smoke. An old woman rearranges baskets of pomegranates, making them look just ugly enough to seem honest. And then the voices begin. Not sales pitches, not yet. These are catch-up murmurs, the slow trickle of conversation returning to life. One woman comments on how deeply her husband snored. Another brags that her toddler didn't wake once. Someone else, sweeping olive leaves from his stoop, mutters that he dreamed of a giant goat who offered him tax advice. You pause at a stall selling fig cakes and honey-roasted nuts. The merchant is reclining behind it, not standing, not hawking, just leaning back on his elbows like a man whose business strategy is, if you want it, you'll come to me. He nods at you. Back from the underworld, he says. You raise an eyebrow. The nap, he clarifies. Everyone dies a little, then comes back smarter, or hungrier. You chuckle and buy a fig cake. This, you realize, is how the market recovers, not in a rush, not in a flurry, but in ripples. A few merchants open first, then a few customers trickle in, then someone starts playing a flute in the corner, and suddenly it's a scene again. Historians still argue whether this two-phase market rhythm was scheduled formally or just culturally agreed upon. Officially, business could resume after noon. But practically, everyone waited until the sun wasn't trying to assassinate them. And the nap softened everything. Disputes cooled off, annoyances faded. That customer who insulted your beans this morning, you're less mad now, maybe even amused. Everyone's just a little too groggy to hold grudges. Even the tone of the market shifts. Morning voices were sharp, loud, persuasive. Post-nap voices, slower, more musical. You hear men calling prices, but half-heartedly. 5 obols for the grapes. Unless you're nice, then maybe 4. A woman responds with, I'll take 3. If you don't mind my son licking one first. There's less urgency now, less ambition, more humanness. People move differently too, not sprinting, meandering, browsing. Every motion looks like it had to be convinced to exist, the kind of casual re-entry into life that only comes after communal rest. You pass by a group of teenagers comparing nap dreams like others might compare scars or love poems. One swears he met a sea nymph. Another insists he dreamt he was a pebble. His friends laugh, not because it's silly, though it is, but because they've all been there. The nap dream world is shared ground, absurd, mysterious, and entirely valid. And over there, under a wide awning, a group of elders play a slow dice game. Their movements are graceful, practiced. One lifts his hand, pauses mid-throw, then smiles. Almost fell asleep again. The others nod like this is entirely acceptable. And it is, because after lunch and a nap, everything's better, even losing at dice. You stop at another stall where a young woman is selling dried herbs. Chamomile, lavender, mint, each one packed into little linen sachets. She explains, softly, that they're for dreaming, to tuck beneath your head, to help you drift. They smell like old gods, she says. You believe her, because the whole market does, a little. Not in the religious sense, not in the thunder and oaths way, but in the quiet confidence of a people who've aligned their bodies with the land, the light, and the sacred lull between chaos and clarity. The sun is lower now, casting a pink-gold glow over clay pots and olive baskets. You feel it in your bones, the slow stretch of a day reborn. Not new, not starting over, just resuming gently, with figs and jokes and shared yawns. And just as you're leaving, you hear someone shout across the agora, "Good nap?" The answer floats back, "It's always a good nap." And that's that. The market is open, the people are fed, the sun is tired. And you feel just right. The agora fades behind you, swallowed by the soft hum of resumed life. Lazy footsteps, drifting conversations, the occasional bark of a dog waking up just in time to do nothing. You take a dusty path heading east, past rows of pottery workshops and half-finished mosaics, toward a city whose name still makes historians raise their eyebrows and sharpen their quills. Sparta. Ah, Sparta, the land of warriors, of iron discipline and early bedtimes, of children trained to wrestle boars before they could spell boar. If Athens was all about discussion, drama, and delightful afternoon naps, Sparta was built on endurance, austerity, and a suspicious lack of throw pillows. So you're wondering, did Spartans nap? Good question. And the honest answer is, historians still argue about it. On one hand, the image we have of Spartans doesn't scream pro-nap. Their entire society was structured around military efficiency. Boys were taken from their families at age 7 and enrolled in the agogya, a brutal training program that emphasized toughness, obedience, and the ability to sleep on rocks while dreaming about how disappointed your instructor would be if you used a blanket. Public comfort was not the Spartan brand. Noisy slumber parties? Banned. Feather beds? Weak. A little lie down after lunch because you ate too much lentil porridge? Sounds like a flogging offence. But peel back the layers of legend and things get murkier. Spartans were humans after all. They sweated under the same sun. They ate the same fig-heavy lunches. They wore the same sweaty tunics. And even warriors with 8-pack abs have to blink slowly and sigh after a big meal. So while naps weren't publicly praised in Sparta, there's strong evidence they weren't forbidden either. One clue lies in Spartan schedule rhythms. Their daily life was divided into strict sections: training, meals, education, religious duties. And in the heat of the Peloponnesian summer, many of these were paused midday. Not out of luxury, but necessity. You can imagine a group of Spartan boys finishing their drills under the scorching sun, skin glistening with sweat, sand stuck in every crevice of their existence. The instructor nods. They file back into barracks. And then, maybe not a full nap, maybe not a snooze with snuggles, but definitely a lie down, a moment of stillness, the kind of strategic rest that prepares you to leap into the next task with terrifying efficiency. There's also anecdotal evidence that even Spartan kings, 2 at a time, remember, were not immune to the midday slump. One tale tells of a king delaying an audience until after rest, though whether that rest was political prep or a sneaky nap behind a curtain is left to interpretation. We do know that Spartan meals were designed for endurance, not comfort. The infamous black broth was a salty, vinegary pork stew that reportedly tasted like bad decisions and sadness. Not exactly food coma material, but still, humans are humans. And it's hard to rule out the possibility that even after a bowl of warrior soup, a few Spartans slumped against a wall and let Hypnos have his way for 15 minutes. And remember, Sparta wasn't a city of machines. It was a society full of rhythms, rituals, and even religious festivals. During Hyacinthia, for example, a festival honoring the god Hyacinthus and Apollo, there were days of singing, dancing, and resting. It was a break from training, a chance to recharge, maybe even nap behind a temple pillar while pretending to meditate on military excellence. The real distinction might lie in attitude. Where Athens celebrated the nap as part of philosophical balance, Sparta likely saw it as functional, a means to an end, a tool to ensure better spear throwing, clearer strategy, faster footwork. Not pleasure, performance. That's why you're not likely to find Spartan poetry extolling the joys of afternoon slumber. No ode to the soft breeze at noon, no sonnet for sleepy warriors, just a lot of stern silence and probably someone shouting at you to drop and give 20. But follow the trail further and you hit the edges of the known world, Spartan mothers, the unsung heroines of Laconia. Often painted as stern and stoic, come back with your shield or on it. These women also managed households, raised children till they were whisked away, and likely carried the emotional load of an entire military state. And guess what? Those women probably napped. Not luxuriously, not with cucumber slices and harp music, but between weaving, baking, and praying, you can bet there were moments, especially in the crushing summer heat, where a Spartan mother sat back, closed her eyes, and allowed herself 15 minutes of rebellion disguised as rest. Maybe she tucked herself into a cool corner next to a clay jar of water and a sleeping infant. Maybe she leaned against the wall of her courtyard and watched shadows stretch across the stone. No declarations. No ceremony, just quiet, just stillness, a nap. And in that moment, whether in a village home or a military tent or the edge of a sunburned training field, Sparta too surrendered, briefly, reluctantly, but completely, because even the strongest armor cracks under the weight of the sun. Even warriors nod off when the breeze is just right. So while Athens might write poems about Hypnos and stage plays about divine dreams, Sparta leaves you only silence. And sometimes that silence sounds an awful lot like snoring. You leave Sparta with a quiet sort of respect. Not admiration. Sparta never really asked for that, but understanding. Even the ironclad have soft hours, and even the most disciplined warrior can't outrun the sleep that seeps into the bones. You follow the coast now, the Aegean stretching beside you like a molten sheet of hammered bronze. The sun is slipping lower, but its heat still clings to the rocks and the back of your neck. Inland, you spot olive trees once again, and then something else, a caravan of travellers clustered under the edge of a fig grove, fanning themselves with broad leaves. They're Romans. You clock the sandals first, thicker, more structured. The tunics are different too, stitched with coloured thread, a little flashier than their Greek cousins. The way they carry themselves says it all. We're here to observe, maybe judge, and definitely steal all your best ideas. Classic Rome. You stroll closer, careful not to interrupt a conversation that is already underway. A Roman woman is speaking in loud, clear Greek, emphatic, exaggerated, like the words are bricks she's trying to build with. She's complaining. "To sleep in the middle of the day," she exclaims. "How barbaric." Her friend, a man in a spotless white toga that no human should be able to keep so clean while travelling, nods in mock horror. And they do it together publicly, like cats. You almost laugh, but not because they're wrong. Because you know what comes next. Give it a week. Give them a week of Greek heat. One hearty lunch of bread and cheese, one too long political debate in the open sun, and they'll be curled up under a fig tree, snoring next to a shepherd like they were born to it. Because Romans came to Greece thinking siestas were for soft people, but they left writing poetry about breezes and shade. Historians have tracked this arc with near-comic clarity. Early Roman writers mocked Greek midday rest. They called it lazy, effeminate, unnecessary. The Roman ideal was vigilance, always on, always ready, even if you were dead inside. Their word for naps, meridiatio, was treated like a joke, a luxury for poets and invalids. But then, something happened. They tried it, and oops, they liked it. By the 1st century BCE, the Roman upper class had adopted the siesta, and then some. Wealthy patricians began structuring their entire day around a long midday break. Work in the early hours, a lavish meal at noon, and then a nap so thorough you'd swear they were preparing for reincarnation. Their homes reflected the shift too. Villas began incorporating shaded peristyles, central courtyards filled with vines, fountains, and strategically placed couches for post-lunch lounging. Architects started thinking in nap terms. Where would the breeze be strongest at 2 p.m.? Which room would stay coolest until the figs were ripe? Even emperors got in on it. Marcus Aurelius, Stoic philosopher, emperor, probably one of the most serious men in Roman history, napped, wrote about it, defended it. Because even if you're composing meditations on the nature of human suffering, sometimes you just need to lie down with a damp cloth over your eyes and stop contemplating the abyss for 20 minutes. One record tells of a senator who was caught dozing in the Senate chamber, publicly, scandalous, but instead of being shamed, he was quietly respected. He rises early, debates fiercely, eats modestly, and rests wisely, someone whispered. That's the Roman way. If you can spin it into virtue, it's fine. Over time, the siesta became synonymous with civilized life. To rest was no longer barbaric. It was refined, balanced, a sign that you had your life and your bowels in order. And you know what's even more delightful? The Romans introduced the siesta back home, importing it to Italy like a foreign spice. In cities like Pompeii and Herculaneum, shops closed at noon, streets emptied, people vanished into their tiled homes for a break so universal it may as well have been a law. In fact, in some Roman towns, court proceedings paused midday. No testimony between noon and 3. Why? Because people fell asleep, even while on trial. Imagine standing before a judge pleading your case and realizing he's nodding off between your carefully rehearsed sobs. Justice, delayed, due to nap. And it wasn't just the elite. Labourers, merchants, scribes, they all caught on. The meridiatio spread across class lines, becoming not a luxury but a shared necessity. Poorer citizens might not have plush cushions or shaded villas, but a stoop or stone bench in the shadow of a column. That worked just fine. The Romans learned what the Greeks had always known. Resisting the midday slump is a fool's game. You might feel triumphant powering through it, but by evening you're a husk of a human, yelling at chickens and forgetting your own name. So they surrendered. And in doing so they changed the Mediterranean forever. You sit now on a low wall overlooking the harbour. The Roman caravan has quieted. Some lie back on packs. One man curls his toga over his eyes. Another mutters, "I suppose a short rest wouldn't hurt." You smile. That's how it begins. Today, the Mediterranean is still shaped by this rhythm, a shared cultural heartbeat built around the heat, the meal, and the nap. From Greek island towns to sleepy Italian villages, you can trace it back through time, like a thread leading straight through history. And the Romans? They may have conquered the Greeks, built empires, and named entire continents. But when it came to naps, they admitted defeat. You rise from the low wall just as the horizon begins its slow, theatrical transition from molten gold to soft rose. The sun is no longer assaulting the earth, it's caressing it, saying farewell with that low, forgiving light that flatters everything it touches, including your sweat-dried tunic and sea-salted sandals. The Roman travellers snore gently behind you, and as you stroll uphill toward a modest residential quarter, you begin to notice something oddly comforting, not dramatic, not flashy, just equal. The city is beginning to move again, not in frenzied bursts, but in lockstep. From high-born homes with decorative mosaics to humble mud-brick houses clinging to the edge of farmland, people are rising, stretching, sweeping the sleep from their limbs. And they're doing it together. This isn't just about heat or digestion or divine influence anymore. This is about equality. Liti. Because in the Greek world, particularly outside rigid hierarchies like Sparta, napping was a great social equalizer. Rich or poor, young or old, man or woman, everybody rested. And more importantly, everybody knew that everybody rested. In a society where class distinctions were often sharp, where wealth meant finer sandals and cleaner water, the siesta was a kind of daily reset button. For at least a few hours the world flattened out. The labourer napped in his shaded field. The scholar napped with scrolls slipping from his lap. The fishmonger's daughter napped on a sun-dappled balcony, while the merchant's wife did the same behind heavy shutters. And for those hours, there was no competition, just collective stillness. Historians still debate how intentionally egalitarian this custom really was. Did it truly erase hierarchy, or just press pause on it? Was the rest of the day so full of class tension that people simply needed a break from pretending it wasn't? Possibly. But what's fascinating is that the nap wasn't performed. No one napped to show off. In fact, it wasn't exactly dignified. Everyone looked the same asleep. Wrinkled tunics, slightly agape mouths, and one sandal dangling off a foot. If anything, it humanized you, equalized you. There's no graceful way to snore through a fig dream. You walk past a courtyard where a pair of elderly neighbours, one in worn linen, the other in a well-dyed chiton, sit side by side, not speaking, just sipping water and blinking back into the day. One scratches his leg, the other pops a fig in his mouth. Same posture, same glazed expressions, same slow nods of acknowledgement. You turn the corner and see a row of children playing knucklebones in the dirt. Just hours ago, they were flopped on rugs like puppies. Now they're yelping and laughing and definitely cheating. They belong to different families, different classes, but right now, they're just kids. They all slept. They all woke. They all threw rocks at the same cat. Siesta didn't care how many drachmas your father had. There's a dignity in that, and it extended to work too. In many trades, pottery, carpentry, farming, the nap was baked into the job. Your employer didn't punish you for closing your eyes after lunch. He expected it. He was doing it too. The potter slept on a bench beside his kiln. The baker slept in the shade behind his oven. The apprentice swept the floors, then tucked himself between sacks of flour. The customer knocking at the door during nap time. They weren't just ignored, they were judged. Who tries to buy amphorae at 2 p.m? Someone might mutter, rolling over. Because it wasn't just your right to nap, it was your duty. Even in politics, there's evidence of this strange equality by stillness. City assemblies and public gatherings were almost always held early in the day or late in the evening. Noon, forget it, the people wouldn't come. Not because they were lazy, but because they had already agreed, implicitly, quietly, that that time belonged to nobody. There's even a record from one Athenian scribe who scribbled a complaint in the margin of a census document. Attendance poor again, too much heat, or too many figs. Either way, nothing done. Can you imagine that today? Congress adjourns because the tuna sandwiches were too heavy. Beautiful. But it didn't stop at adults. Children were taught to nap, not just encouraged. Taught. Structured into their upbringing. A proper child learned when to be quiet, when to lie down, when to shut up and let their elders snore. There are depictions in vase paintings of toddlers curled up in corners, little clay toys scattered beside them, their mothers nearby with eyes closed, the whole house holding its breath. Even schools, yes, the places where Socratic questioning bloomed, recognized this. Some teachers paused lessons after lunch, allowing students to drift off in the shade, because nobody learns well when their forehead is sliding slowly down a tablet. And then there were the festivals, big, raucous, wine-soaked events that often included built-in nap breaks. Between processions and performances, citizens would retreat to shaded groves, curl up under grapevines, and doze off mid-celebration. Imagine Mardi Gras with a siesta break scheduled between floats. That was Athens on a good day. You round another bend and come upon a shared well. Two women draw water side by side. One wears gold earrings, the other wears none. But both dip clay jugs in silence, blinking slowly, still half inside their dreams. The richer woman sneezes, the other hands her a cloth. No class, no ceremony, just community in its most drowsy human form. This was the beauty of the Greek siesta. It wasn't private. It was public, visible, normal, a shared truth. And in a world where status ruled almost everything, where your name, land, gender, and blood dictated your worth, sleep didn't care. Nap time came, and everyone lay down. Together, evening tiptoes in, not with a crash but a hush, a golden hush, as though the sun itself doesn't want to disturb whatever peace was born during the long afternoon nap. You find yourself drifting toward one of the most unexpected places to explore this sleepy rhythm, the theatre. Yes, the theatre, you heard right, because while Greek drama was full of gods, betrayals, hubris, and people shouting, "Woe unto me," at the top of their lungs, it was also structured around something far more ordinary. Sleep. Not just as a dramatic device, but as a logistical reality. You reach the outer edge of the amphitheatre carved into the hillside. It yawns before you in wide semicircles of stone, each row catching the last warm light of the day like sun-baked steps into a dream. You picture it full, thousands of citizens gathered for the latest tragedy or comedy, and tucked among them, plenty of half-asleep spectators. The Greeks didn't schedule their festivals, especially the big ones like the city Dionysia, without careful consideration of time, sun, and bodily fatigue. They knew when people were alert, and they absolutely knew when people were not. So most performances began in the early morning. Some started just after dawn, lasting until midday. Tragedy after tragedy, delivered to a crowd that had already eaten, maybe had a little wine, and was now fighting that post-meal fog as Oedipus screamed his final lines. People nodded off. It was normal. Some scholars suggest that playwrights even accounted for it, pacing their scenes to allow for audience fatigue. You'd start strong, capture them while they were still chewing olives, then slow the tempo in the middle. Lull them, maybe. Then hit them with a powerful ending, just as everyone was stirring back to life. It was ancient entertainment wrapped in nap-conscious design. And it wasn't just timing, the architecture played a role too. Those high, curved rows were open to the sky, which meant direct sunlight. And in a city like Athens, where the sun hits like a flaming discus thrown by an angry Apollo, the seating arrangement practically dared you to fall asleep halfway through Act 2. People brought cushions, cloaks, wide-brimmed hats. Some even shaded themselves with scrolls. If you think modern moviegoers get comfortable, try a 5-hour Aeschylus marathon in the open sun. You'd be snoring into your neighbour's toga by intermission. But here's the thing, it wasn't rude. Napping in the theatre was expected, not applauded, of course. No one handed out awards for best-timed doze, but it wasn't punished. The theatre was part of public life, and public life included sleep. Just as citizens debated philosophy at dawn and bought grapes at dusk, they also slept through long speeches about fate and vengeance because, well, that's what people do. You weren't kicked out for nodding off, you were simply human. And that's where it gets even more fascinating, because playwrights, especially the clever ones like Aristophanes, played with that drowsiness. They made jokes about sleepy spectators. They wrote in yawns. One line from a lesser-known comedy even mocks an audience member for waking up just in time to cheer at the wrong moment. You nap through the plot but clap for the corpse. Brutal, but fair. Some scholars believe that the middle play of a festival trilogy, often the slowest, most philosophical, was intentionally designed as a nap buffer, a softer piece that allowed for drifting attention. You didn't need to catch every line, you just needed to absorb the mood, like a lullaby disguised as poetry. Others argue that the use of choruses, those groups of actors dancing and singing in rhythmic unison, was a kind of wake-up call. The volume, the movement, the drumbeat, it wasn't just theatrical, it was functional. A subtle way to shake the dreamers awake before the final scene. And then there were the comedies, which often followed the heavy tragedies like dessert after a dense meal. They were loud, fast, full of innuendo, fart jokes, and people wearing ridiculous masks. The perfect antidote to sleep, or, depending on your sense of humour, a gentle push deeper into it. You sit now in one of the upper seats, feeling the warm stone against your legs, listening to the imaginary echoes of lines shouted centuries ago. Somewhere down there, in the orchestra circle, a chorus stomps and sings. You blink slowly. The rhythm is soothing, and suddenly it makes sense. The theatre wasn't a separate world. It was woven into the natural cycle of the day. You arrived full of morning energy. You sagged with the midday heat. You nodded off under the sun. You woke as the shadows lengthened, and the chorus returned for a final bow. You leave the theatre just as the stars begin to blink into the sky. The roads are quieter now. Candles flicker behind shutters. Somewhere, someone sings softly. Maybe a lullaby, maybe just a tune remembered from a dream. You smile. Even drama paused for the nap. Even art bent to the body's rhythm. And in doing so, it honored what we so often forget. That rest is not interruption, it is part of the performance. You walk beneath the darkening sky, the air cooler now, tinged with the scent of rosemary and the faint tang of the sea. The roads are quieter. Conversations grow softer. Lanterns flicker in doorways like sleepy eyes blinking open, just barely. You pass a pair of boys chasing a hoop, their laughter trailing behind them like a ribbon. One suddenly flops into the dirt, breathless, arms outstretched. "I'm dead," he groans. "No," his friend says, flopping beside him. "Just napping." Classic. And as you watch them lie there, backs against the earth, legs dusted in soil, you realize something strange. These kids aren't tired from play. They're tired from waking, from resurfacing. Because the nap, it lingers, it changes the shape of the day. Even after you're upright again, it hangs on your shoulders like a forgotten dream, softening your limbs, slowing your breath. But not everything stays slow, because this is also the time when the gods start to pull at the edges of your mind again, specifically the gods who like to interrupt things. You've met Hypnos, you've heard whispers of Morpheus and the Oneiroi, you've even seen Zeus knocked out by a sneaky nap in the middle of Olympus. But now it's time to meet the real drama king of your drowsy hours, Ares. Yes, the god of war. The one with the shouting, the bloodlust, the general vibe of a man who punches through walls just to look cool. And, believe it or not, he loses to Hypnos regularly. There's a strange poetry in this. In Greek mythology, war and sleep are often pitted against each other, not in the sense of loud versus quiet, but as opposing forces of the soul. Ares represents chaos, movement, destruction. Hypnos offers peace, stillness, and surrender. And more often than not, it's Hypnos who wins. Take the Trojan War, for instance. There's a moment when Hera, queen of the gods, needs to distract Zeus. She wants to tip the battle in favor of the Greeks without Zeus interfering, so what does she do? She calls on Hypnos, the gentle sleeper, and asks him to put Zeus down for a nap. Hypnos, understandably, hesitates. Last time he tried that, Zeus woke up mid-snooze and hurled Hypnos across the heavens. But Hera flatters him, bribes him, promises him a pretty nymph, and eventually Hypnos agrees. He waits until Zeus is, let's say, emotionally compromised, distracted by Hera's charms, and then he sprinkles that sleep dust. And, boom, Zeus is out cold, while the king of gods snores peacefully atop Mount Ida. Ares is on the battlefield, doing what he does best, wreaking havoc. But now, unprotected, no Zeus to shield him, no thunderbolt backup. And sure enough, things turn. Sleep tips the war, let that sink in. The battlefield isn't won by a sword or a strategy. It's won by a well-timed nap. This dynamic, sleep as the secret counterbalance to conflict, shows up again and again in Greek thought. Not always literally, but thematically. When warriors become too consumed by rage, what do the gods do? They force sleep. When grief becomes too loud, too raw, who arrives? Sleep. And when Ares roars, Hypnos whispers and wins. It's easy to overlook this in a world that celebrates urgency, but for the Greeks, especially in their mythology, stillness was a power of its own. Not just absence of movement, but presence of calm. And nowhere is that more evident than in the tales of soldiers returning from war. Many would stop first at temples, not just to offer thanks, but to rest. Sometimes for days, they'd lie on temple floors, hoping for dreams, for guidance, for peace. They weren't just healing their wounds, they were detoxing from adrenaline, relearning quiet, because violence, for all its noise, eventually collapses into exhaustion. And that's where Hypnos waits. You wander now through the outskirts of a village where farmers are locking up their tools. A young man dusts his arms and yawns, leaning against a fence post. His father sits nearby, nodding slowly, clearly between thoughts, and already halfway to sleep. And you remember something. Greek warriors trained to fight, but they also trained to rest. Athens, for all its valor and grand speeches, was a city of routine. Even in its military, rest was calculated. Marches began before sunrise. Midday was for food, shade, and sometimes full-body collapse. Leaders understood that a tired soldier was a dangerous one, not because of what he might do, but what he might fail to do. One Spartan general once remarked, "The man who fights without sleep is already defeated." Of course, he probably said it more dramatically, possibly while throwing a spear at someone, but still, there's a quiet dignity in that idea. That sleep is not surrender, it's resistance to burnout, to chaos, to the kind of spiraling urgency that convinces you everything is life or death. And in Greek life, the nap wasn't just medicine, it was armor. You return to town as twilight settles over rooftops. The stars blink awake one by one, and someone down the alley lights a small oil lamp. The flame flickers in time with your steps, and you feel it now in your chest, that tug, that gentle pull downward, not because you're weak, but because you're ready, because the gods have fought their wars, and Hypnos is waiting. Again, twilight stretches like a cat across the city. The last light of the sun slips behind terracotta rooftops, and the shadows grow long and yawning. You pass a pair of old women peeling beans by lantern light. One hums an old tune, something without words, the kind that loops gently, the musical equivalent of rocking in a chair. The other pauses mid-peel and blinks slowly, as if trying to remember whether she already napped today, or only dreamed that she did. You make your way back toward the agora, where the crowds have thinned again, not because of heat this time, but because the day itself is winding down. Even in ancient Greece, there were things to do in the evening, small tasks, errands, moments of gossip. But it's all gentler now, as though the nap still echoes in everyone's bones. But tonight, you're headed toward a quieter place. Not for shopping or sleeping, but for arguing, because in case you haven't noticed, Greeks loved a good debate. They would debate anything: politics, philosophy, ethics, olives, the best kind of goat cheese. If two Greeks were in the same room for more than 4 minutes, someone was going to ask a rhetorical question, and someone else was going to answer it while dramatically pacing. But even this sacred cultural pastime bent to the logic of the midday nap. You arrive at the edge of the Stoa of Attalos, a long colonnade lined with columns and echoing footsteps. It was once one of the grandest public gathering spots in Athens, a place where merchants, teachers, and thinkers could gather out of the sun, shielded from both weather and eavesdropping chickens. During the cooler morning hours, the Stoa buzzed with civic life, contracts signed, lawsuits filed, Socratic methods inflicted on the unprepared. But around midday, silence. Arguments paused, students wandered off, philosophers draped their cloaks over their heads and vanished into nearby homes or shaded corners. Even lawsuits were adjourned for rest. That's right. Court cases paused for naps. Can you imagine that? Your Honour, I object, on the grounds that my stomach is full and I am deeply sleepy. Request granted. There are even documented cases of deliberate breaks built into the trial schedule. Judges knew they couldn't focus after a heavy meal. Witnesses knew they'd be sharper if they didn't testify while their blood was busy digesting figs. Even the jurors were encouraged to return refreshed, lest justice be delivered through half-lidded eyes and a brain fog thicker than goat stew. Historians still argue whether this was a universal practice or a privilege of Athens and other large cities, but there's little doubt that the Greeks designed their public discourse around the rhythms of the body, and the body, after noon, wanted rest. In smaller towns, the village square would empty out. Any unresolved debates from the morning were mentally bookmarked. The barber's cousin who had been shouting about unfair taxation would roll his eyes and say, "We'll pick this up after I've digested my chickpeas." And they would, because post-nap arguments were better, calmer, more precise, less likely to devolve into plate throwing. Some philosophers even claimed that rest was a tool for reason, that the brain, like the soil, needed to lie fallow before good ideas could grow. One lesser-known thinker, Diodorus of Amphipolis, once wrote, "The man who argues immediately after eating is full of wind, not wisdom." Brutal, but not wrong. You walk through the Stoa now, your footsteps echoing in the cool marble corridor. A few citizens lounge nearby, half engaged in a gentle discussion about ethics, possibly wine. One scratches his beard, the other picks at a piece of dried fruit, lost in thought. And it hits you. Even their arguments napped, not stopped entirely, just softened. Elsewhere in private homes, similar conversations unfold. A father and son debate the merits of military service over dinner, though the father's speech slows mid-sentence, replaced by a yawn and a lazy wave. "We'll finish tomorrow," he mutters, eyes drooping. Two neighbours sitting on a shared rooftop discuss a land dispute in voices so low they sound like lullabies. One nods off mid-rant. The other covers him with a spare cloth. Even lovers, sprawled side by side after a long day, argue in whispers about poetry, about missed glances, about who first fell asleep during the afternoon walk. But none of it escalates, because napping has changed the tone. It's as if the body's pause created a mental softness, a willingness to bend. People are still stubborn, this is Greece after all, but they're less sharp-edged, less desperate to be right. And there's something else too. In temples and sanctuaries, the priests and priestesses follow a sacred rhythm not unlike the civic one. Public rituals are held early, then comes rest. Then, in the evening, smaller ceremonies resume, quieter, more introspective. The Pythia, the oracle of Delphi, wouldn't utter prophecies on an empty stomach or while sleep-deprived. She rested, she prepared, she understood that truth needs space. And so, from oracles to lawyers to market women, the Greeks carried this understanding, that rest doesn't dilute ideas, it strengthens them. You pause at a small plaza now where a group of students gather under torchlight. Their teacher speaks slowly, arms folded, voice low. No shouting, no drama, just shared curiosity passed gently between minds like a blanket between cold hands. And though you've walked miles today through homes, groves, temples, harbours and dusty courts, this may be the clearest truth yet. The nap didn't end discussion. It made it worth having. The torchlight sways behind you as you continue your slow walk through the quieting city. Your sandals scuff the stones, each step a little slower, a little softer, as though even your feet remember the feel of cool midday shade and don't want to disturb the memory. The scent of dinner lingers in the air, grilled onions, something fishy, maybe a hint of honey. You hear clinking dishes through windows, the last conversations of the day drifting up into the night air. Some voices are still bright, others already dissolving into yawns, but not everyone's winding down. Because now you pass through a modest gate and out into the fields, beyond the walls where the city gives way to farms and the rhythms of rural life. Here, in the dim fields under the rising moon, another truth waits. The nap saved the farmer. Out here, you find a different kind of silence. Not the thoughtful hush of philosophers or the lazy pause of shopkeepers, but a silence earned from toil. the kind that soaks through your tunic and lodges between your shoulder blades. You spot them, figures curled in the crook of olive trees resting on woven mats, soft snores carried away by the breeze. One man sleeps beside a basket of grapes. Another woman lies with a sickle still resting in her hand. A child snoozes in the shadow of a goat. These aren't nighttime sleeps. These are the leftovers of naps, the kind that sneak back into your muscles long after the sun has faded, that half-weight still tugging at your arms, that dreamy daze still clinging to your thoughts. Because for the farmers, the siesta wasn't just a cultural flourish, it was essential survival. Think about it. These were people whose days began before light, when the sky was still bruised with night, and the first bleating goat was the only alarm clock in existence. They worked until the heat bent the air into waves, until the tools felt like lead, until you couldn't tell if the sweat on your face was from effort or the sun trying to boil your brain. And then they stopped. Not forever, not even for long, but for just enough, under the shade of trees, in the cool of their homes, sometimes with a small towel over the face, sometimes with a cat curled up at the feet. They ate, they slept, they reset, and then they went back out, not like warriors, not like scholars, but like people who knew their limits. Historians still debate whether rural napping was more common than in the cities, or simply more respected. After all, farmers had no boss standing over them. The land was both enemy and ally. It gave what it gave, but only if you worked smart, and smart included sleeping. One clay tablet from a rural community near Corinth includes a list of chores etched around a curious midday symbol, 2 slanted lines forming a small triangle. Scholars believe this may have signified pause, a note to rest before resuming the harvest. It's not glamorous, but it's real. And more importantly, it was taught. In villages across Greece, napping was passed down as tradition. Grandmothers shooed grandchildren indoors when the sun reached its peak. Fathers stopped ploughing and lay back with arms crossed. It wasn't optional, it was sacred. You work harder, one old farmer says through cracked lips and sun-browned teeth, if you stop for a while. He gestures to a young boy nearby, kicking a stone in slow motion. That one used to skip naps, thought he was strong, then he fainted into a melon. Lesson learned. And it wasn't just about heat or hunger, it was about timing. In the afternoon, after rest, the light returned in a kinder form. Shadows grew long, breezes returned, and the land softened its edges. Grapes picked at 5 p.m. came off the vine like jewels. Olives loosened their grip. Even the animals changed rhythm. Goats stood again. Chickens pecked. The world resumed, more generous now, because it had napped too. You strolled through rows of fig trees, the scent of ripe fruit perfuming the air. A man is stirring from his mat, blinking against the fading light. Even the gods nap, he mutters, more to himself than you. And he's right. In rural temples, some of the oldest carvings depict deities reclining, not in battle, not on thrones, but resting. Dionysus, with one arm flopped dramatically over his eyes, Demeter with her harvest laid down beside her, even Hermes, feet crossed, hat tipped low, catching a quick snooze after whatever trickery he'd just finished. It wasn't laziness, it was balance. The Greeks didn't glorify overwork, not in the fields, not in the temples, not even in the stories they told. Heroes struggled, yes, fought, suffered, strived, but they slept. Achilles in his tent, weeping and dreaming. Odysseus shipwrecked and napping on strange shores. Even Heracles between labours, passed out under a tree with wine on his lips and a lion's skin as a blanket. The nap was woven into every myth, every life, every field. And as you pass the final row of grapevines where a family sits under lantern light sharing bread and the last figs of the season, it becomes clear the land shaped the people. And the people listened. They didn't fight the sun, they paused, they closed their eyes, they dreamt just a little, and then they woke and went on, not in haste, but in rhythm. You leave the vineyard behind, the laughter of the family melting into the rising chorus of night insects. The cicadas have quieted, finally, and the crickets take over with their rhythmic rasping like nature's own lullaby. You follow a narrow footpath now, one less travelled, curving upward into the hills. The air grows cooler, the stars multiply. Somewhere behind you, a donkey brays as if announcing your progress. Ahead, stone, sky, and stillness. You're heading to a place that on the surface seems the opposite of rest, a place of rules and oaths and scribes hunched over ledgers. But tonight, we're going to open the door quietly, slip past the clerks, and peek into an unexpected chamber of stillness. The bureaucracy nap, yes, you heard that right. In ancient Greece, particularly in Athens, government was everywhere. Voting assemblies, legal trials, military councils, public finance audits. So much democracy it could make your head spin. And behind every lofty ideal stood the real machinery of the city, scribes, secretaries, and minor officials. And do you know what all these hard-working bureaucrats had in common? They napped. Oh, not during official business, of course, that would be improper. But they scheduled their days in such a way that napping became part of office culture. A typical bureaucrat might rise before dawn, head to the bouleuterion, the council house, to record the daily agenda, note who spoke, tally votes. Then, around midday, they'd eat something modest, a bit of barley bread, olives if they were lucky, and withdraw to a shady corner, scrolls as pillows, cloaks as blankets, ledgers tucked neatly to one side, and just like that, gone, snoring quietly beneath the weight of civic responsibility. One anecdote tells of an Athenian archivist named Thrax, yes, that was his real name, who kept 2 sand timers on his desk, one for official duties, one for naps. And if anyone questioned him, he'd point to the second hourglass and mutter, "Time for efficient dreaming." Historians still argue whether this was widespread practice or just an open secret. But the fragments tell us plenty. Clay tablets and wax writing boards show time logs that mysteriously pause around the 6th hour, only to resume mid-afternoon. Marginal notes say things like "after rest" or "resumed at cooler hour." Even public decrees issued by the city sometimes bear timestamp gaps, as if the scrolls themselves had taken a nap. And who can blame them? Imagine sitting in a stone chamber, midday sun beating down, ink drying before it hits the page, and your colleague droning on about sheep taxes. You're not staying awake through that. You're entering the arms of hypnos, whether you like it or not. But this wasn't seen as negligence. In fact, in many cases it was seen as practicality. Just as soldiers napped to fight better, bureaucrats napped to think better. One administrator's tablet reads, "On this day I erred thrice before the pause, but none after." Translation: I was useless before my nap, but afterward I crushed it. Even Socrates, yes, that Socrates, joked that democracy would fail if the city clerks weren't allowed a little shut-eye. "The ballot is no better than the bed," he quipped. Whether that was philosophical or flirty, no one's quite sure. And it wasn't just Athens. In Delphi, temple administrators kept detailed calendars of rituals, pilgrim offerings, and maintenance work. These records show distinct lulls during midday, enough to suggest that Aetes had even sacred paperwork paused for a snooze. Imagine it. The sacred accountant of Apollo, slumped in his chair, quill slipping from his fingers, a column of numbers gently smudging into dreams. Of course, naps weren't officially mandated. No citizen decree declared, "Let it be known thou shalt nap between thy lentils and thy budget reports." But culturally, it was there, unspoken, understood. The unglamorous backbone of the city, the scribes, the tax clerks, the keepers of records, they had long days, longer memories, and occasionally very short naps. There's something oddly poetic about it, isn't there? We remember the grand speeches, the daring generals, the impassioned philosophers, but we forget that somewhere in a dusty office, a man with a crooked nose and ink-stained fingers once rested his head against the cool stone of his desk and slept. Not because he was weak, because he had work to do, and knew he'd do it better rested. You round a final bend, and the city unfurls below you like a quiet painting. Lanterns twinkle like stars trapped on earth. The Parthenon glows faintly, half asleep itself. You sit down on a stone ledge, the breeze curling up around your legs, and you think about the hidden nappers, the silent scribes, the people who moved the gears behind the glory. Not poets, not generals, just folks who wrote things down and rested when they needed to. Because even democracy needs a nap. You sit on the ledge for a long while, watching the city shift from dusk to full night. The marble glows silver now, touched by moonlight, and the streets grow still except for the occasional dog trotting home from wherever dogs go at this hour. Somewhere down in the market district, a lyre plucks a soft tune, too slow for dancing, too sweet for arguing, just right for drifting. And speaking of drifting, tonight's journey is about to take a softer turn. You've walked the dusty fields, sat through sleepy court trials, tiptoed past dozing scribes, but now we head somewhere even older than cities, older than law, into the quiet shadows of tradition, because the Greeks didn't invent napping, not by a long shot, but what they did do, perhaps better than anyone, was understand its ritual power, and nowhere was that power clearer than in the sacred practice of incubation. That's not the egg kind, it's the dream kind. Let's set the scene. You're in Epidaurus, a sanctuary famed not for war or wisdom, but for healing. People travel from across the known world to reach this place. Sick, broken, desperate. They climb the winding paths to the temple of Asclepius, the god of medicine. They bring offerings, sacrifice a rooster or two, whisper prayers into the stone. And then they sleep. Inside the abaton, a long, pillared hall beside the temple, they lie down, wrap themselves in wool cloaks and close their eyes, and wait. Because in Epidaurus, sleep isn't just rest, it's medicine. The practice is called incubation, enkoimesis in Greek, and it's as mystical as it sounds. The belief is simple but powerful. While you sleep inside the sacred precinct, the god visits you in a dream and tells you how to heal. Not a metaphor, not an abstract listen to your heart situation. No, we're talking about direct dream instructions. Take more honey, rub goat fat on your elbow, take 3 steps east at sunrise and sneeze into a well. That kind of thing. Some dreams were more symbolic. Snakes licking your feet, birds flying backward. That's sort of divine poetry. But the priests were trained to interpret these messages. The morning after, you'd share your dream and they'd translate it into a treatment plan. Needless to say, some historians are deeply skeptical. Was this just placebo, clever psychology, strategic suggestion? Maybe. But here's what can't be denied. It worked often enough to keep people coming. Stone inscriptions line the walls of Epidaurus, thank you notes in marble, describing miraculous recoveries after a night's nap in the abaton. Blind men who woke with sight, lame women who danced out of the hall, chronic illness chased away by a divine visit between dreams. And this wasn't unique to Epidaurus. Temples all over Greece practiced forms of dream healing, in Pergamon, in Libena. Even in the Egyptian-influenced temples of the southern islands, sleep was part of sacred ritual. It was seen not just as a pause in life, but as a bridge between the mortal and the divine, between mind and body, between knowledge and healing. And the preparation for these temple naps, elaborate. You didn't just roll in with a pillow and hope for the best. You fasted. You bathed in sacred water. You sometimes chanted prayers until your voice turned to breath. The priests might burn specific herbs to guide the dream. They might massage your feet with oils. They might have a serpent, yes, a literal snake, curl around your sleeping mat to bless your body while you dreamed. Mildly horrifying? Yes. But weirdly effective? Also yes. Because here's the deeper truth. The Greeks understood that sleep wasn't just for the tired. It was for the wounded, for the broken-hearted, the grief-stricken, the fevered and frantic, the ones whose souls ached louder than their limbs. Sleep was a return, not escape, not avoidance. Return to wholeness, to clarity, to balance. And in a society that prized strength, performance, beauty, they still carved out space, literal temples for the act of lying still and doing nothing. That's profound. You leave the imagined halls of Epidaurus now, your mind swimming with images. Cloaked figures breathing slowly on stone floors, the rustle of sacred leaves, the low hiss of temple snakes sliding past oil lamps, You think about how even the gods required sleep, how Zeus napped, Hera napped, Apollo dozed in sunlit groves when he wasn't firing plague arrows or composing music. And Asclepius? He healed people in their dreams. You return to the hillside above Athens where the stars are thick now, bleeding into the horizon. Somewhere below, a woman rolls over in her bed caught between sleep and waking. Maybe she's dreaming of figs, maybe of gods, maybe both. And you? You're beginning to understand. This journey through napping wasn't just about temperature or tradition, it's about trust. The kind of trust it takes to close your eyes and believe that something better waits on the other side, even if it's just a whisper from a god in your dreams. The stars seem closer now, not just above but around you, hovering in olive branches, glinting off roof tiles, shimmering in puddles left behind by the morning's washwater. You breathe in deep. It smells of ash, figwood, and something older, like linen, folded so many times it carries the weight of every shoulder that's rested against it. You're not alone. Across the city, the whole world is winding down, not in some grand dramatic final act, but slowly, naturally, as if the day itself is stretching out for one last yawn before curling up and letting go. And now, we reach something precious, something small but central, the domestic nap. Because while gods napped in temples and philosophers dozed mid-dialogue, it's in the homes, the hearths, the courtyards, the shaded corners of small rooms that Greek napping found its truest form. You pass through a narrow alleyway, your steps soft on worn stone. A shutter creaks. Somewhere a mother sings a lullaby so quiet it's barely breath. And you slip inside, not into one house, but into many. One after another, each with a nap story folded between its walls. Start with the mother of four. Her name is Anthea. She's strong-shouldered, flower-dusted, always moving, until midday, when she finally lowers herself onto a stool and leans against the cool clay of the oven wall. Just for a moment. She closes her eyes, bread rises, children rest, and in that sliver of silence, she disappears. Not because she's lazy, because she's human. Then there's old Diodoros, who used to sell garum fish sauce in the agora before his knees gave out. Now he naps every day under the grape arbor behind his house. His grandkids play nearby, knowing to be loud, but not too loud. When he snores, they giggle. When he doesn't, they check. He's still breathing. He always is. Or take Ione, the widow who lives alone with her cat and a stack of old weaving patterns. She naps right after the noon bell, curled beside her loom. Sometimes she wakes up with a strand of thread tangled in her hair. She never minds. Even the cat naps with her. There's no formality here. No ritual incense, just normalcy. And that's the beauty of it. In Greek homes, napping wasn't scheduled. It was assumed. As natural as dipping bread in oil. As necessary as refilling the cistern. These homes weren't built with bedrooms the way modern houses are. They had multi-purpose spaces, one corner for eating, another for weaving, another for sleep. Mats rolled out, curtains drawn, the whole house breathed together. It wasn't always quiet. Babies cried, chickens wandered inside, but even then the nap persisted, like a tide. It might be disrupted, but it always returned. Some houses even had dedicated napping spots, a shaded platform near the back door, or a favoured spot beside a window where the breeze slipped through at just the right angle. The Greeks knew their nap real estate. It was often the coolest place in the house, and everyone knew to leave it alone between the 5th and 6th hour. Historians still argue whether these domestic naps were gendered. Did women nap more? Did men rest only after returning home? But the records suggest one thing clearly. Everyone eventually gave in, even the kids, especially the kids. Greek children were raised with the nap as a basic rhythm of life. After a morning of chores or lessons or completely justified rock throwing, they'd nap on mats, under benches, against goats, whatever surface was soft enough. Oh, and parents didn't treat naps as punishment or luxury. They were expected. A child skipping a nap wasn't rebellious, they were confused. You peek into one such house now, a child curled in a doorway, sandals half on, thumb in mouth, utterly defeated by the weight of the day. Perfect. And when the nap ended, the house returned. Quiet footsteps, doors creaking open, water ladled into cups. Life resumed, not with a bang, but a whisper. There's something deeply comforting in that. In knowing that your home, the place of laundry, arguments, stale cheese and good shoes, is also your sanctuary for pause. And while it may not seem dramatic, this is where Greek napping truly took root. Not in temples, not in theatres, but right here in the ordinary. The woman who nodded off while peeling garlic, the man who dozed with a scroll open on his chest, the boy who fell asleep face first in lentils. These were not failures of energy, these were acts of quiet trust. Trust in the home, trust in the body, trust that the world could wait while you rested, even if just for a little while. And tonight, that trust still lives in the walls. You pass a doorway where a couple shares a low murmur of conversation, then fall silent. The sound of one exhaling, then the other. A dog sighs, a lantern dims. Sleep spreads, not as an order, not as a command, but as an invitation. And almost no one refuses, because the day is ending. And in Greece, endings are soft. They close their eyes, they breathe in, they let go. And so do you. The night deepens around you now. The city's breath has slowed, doors are bolted with soft clicks. Lamps flicker and go out. Even the dogs seem to have agreed that barking can wait till morning. Only the moon continues on, unbothered, unblinking, casting silver shadows that ripple over rooftops and shine softly in puddles left behind from evening washing. But there's one last place you want to visit tonight. Not Athens, not Sparta, not even the countryside with its fig trees and sleepy goats. No. Tonight you journey beyond Greece entirely, to the Greek colonies, places where the nap, like language, wine, and philosophical hot takes, was carried across the sea. You follow a dusty trail down toward the harbour. You pass a row of statues whose eyes seem to stare through you, ancient and amused. The sea air thickens as you approach the docks where triremes once set sail, not just for war, but for expansion. And what did they take with them? Democracy? Sure. Olive oil? Absolutely. And siestas? Definitely. Greek colonists established outposts all over the Mediterranean, Sicily, southern Italy, Asia Minor, North Africa. And as they built temples and agoras and theatres, they also exported something less tangible, the rhythm of rest. Take Syracuse in Sicily, a thriving city-state once ruled by tyrants and thinkers alike. The midday sun there was even more brutal than in Athens, sharper, like a slap from Apollo himself. So they did the logical thing. They napped. Historical records from the colonies speak of adjusted market hours, shrines with shaded courtyards, and even public baths that closed during the hottest part of the day, only to reopen later when the breeze returned. One merchant's journal from the 5th century BCE includes a recurring phrase, "Closed for the heat, may Dionysus keep your grapes fresh," which in modern terms is basically, "Gone to nap, don't touch my wine." Syracuse wasn't alone. In Ephesus, a bustling port city on the coast of Asia Minor, nap culture took root and blossomed. Archaeological remains show homes built with thick walls, internal atriums that allowed for airflow and shade, and even small sleeping couches positioned away from the sun. Some scholars suggest these nooks weren't just decorative, they were dedicated nap zones. You can almost picture it. A merchant returns home after shouting himself hoarse in the marketplace, flops into his cool corner, and drifts off mid-rant. His wife steps around him, unfazed, muttering, "He's not wrong, just unconscious." But what's fascinating is that the nap adapted. In each colony, the custom evolved. In Massalia, modern-day Marseille, the Greek settlers encountered Celtic rhythms, harsher winters, shorter days. The nap here became more of a late afternoon rest, especially during seasonal festivals, less about escaping heat, more about pacing for the long nights of music, fire, and fermented barley drinks. Meanwhile, in Cyrene, a Greek colony in North Africa, napping took on ritual significance. There, a local Libyan belief in dream prophecy meshed beautifully with Greek incubation practices. The result? Siestas that doubled as spiritual appointments. People slept not just to recharge, but to receive visions, guidance from gods, ancestors, or whatever friendly voice happened to drop by in their dreams. Historians still argue whether this blending of customs was intentional or just inevitable. But it happened, and it happened everywhere. Nap culture wasn't a static export, it was a living rhythm, tuned to local climates, beliefs, and needs. In Byzantium, yes, the future Constantinople, records suggest a growing urban restfulness in the midday hours. Even as the city expanded, officials scheduled court meetings and public announcements to avoid the 6th hour. It was as if time itself bent gently around the need to stop. You reach the harbour now. The sea is black and humming. The ships bob slightly, ropes creaking. You imagine one of those boats heavy with amphorae leaving the dock centuries ago, bound for a new colony. And on board, men packed shoulder to shoulder, hot, tired. And after their rations, eyes fluttering closed, because even at sea they napped. They had to. No one rode for long without rest. In fact, trireme captains often scheduled rotations specifically around rest cycles. Especially in long voyages, naps weren't a luxury, they were logistics. And when those sailors arrived, they brought more than wine, they brought the understanding that human strength ebbs and flows, that labor means nothing without recovery. That exploration is only possible if you stop long enough to dream of what might come next. As you sit at the edge of the pier now, listening to the gentle slap of water against stone, the truth becomes clear. The siesta didn't stay in Athens. It sailed, it bent and shifted, it learned new languages, and it kept beating gently at the center of 1,000 different days, from Sicily to Smyrna, from Byzantium to the sands of Cyrene. Wherever Greeks went, napping followed, not just as a pause, but as a promise, that even far from home, the body still knew what it needed. Just a little time, a little shade, and the trust to close your eyes. The wind stirs the edge of your cloak now, teasing at the hem like a sleepy cat pawing at a blanket. You rise slowly from the harbour wall, bones humming with the rhythm of the waves, and start the long walk uphill again. The streets are nearly empty. A lantern burns low outside a taverna, casting flickers of gold across wine-stained steps and abandoned dice. The city is fully asleep now, and yet not quite silent, because somewhere, always somewhere, a poet is still awake. And if anyone knew how to turn naps into something a little more permanent, it was the poets. Tonight, you're stepping into the dream-soaked world of Greek literature, where the nap doesn't just happen, it means something. You find yourself in a small courtyard, lined with amphorae, vines climbing lazily up the walls. There's a bench of worn stone, still warm from the day's sun, and in the middle, a young man with ink-stained fingers, reading out loud to no one in particular. His voice is soft, cadenced, sleepy, perfect. He's reciting from Homer, naturally. In fact, much of what we know about how ancient Greeks felt about sleep and naps comes from their poets. And they didn't treat sleep as just a biological process. They treated it as a character, a force, a door. Take the Iliad, for example. It's not exactly known for napping. It's more, spears and shouting and general macho chaos. But right in the middle of it all, Hypnos makes his entrance. The god of sleep, not as an abstract, but as a literal person. Delicate, powerful, feared. There's a moment where he's described as soothing the eyelids of men. And that sounds lovely, until you realize he's being recruited to take down Zeus via nap sabotage. Classic Homer. But it doesn't stop there. In the Odyssey, sleep plays an even bigger role. Odysseus spends much of the story either sleeping, waking from sleep, or being manipulated through sleep. In one stretch, he sleeps so deeply that his men betray him by opening the bag of winds. In another, he's lulled into rest by the gods. Sleep becomes a way to reset the world, to prepare him for what's next. And perhaps most striking of all, Odysseus finally reaches home, lays down and sleeps on Ithacan soil for the first time in decades. Homer pauses everything, every plot, every twist, every threat, to give this man a nap. Not a battle, not a feast, a nap. Because that's what home is, not safety, not victory, just the permission to sleep without fear. And poets after Homer, they kept that tradition alive. Pindar describes sleep as the sweetest gift of the gods. Not wealth, not love, sleep. Sappho, tender as always, calls upon sleep like a friend, asking it to wrap her in silence. Theocritus, in his pastoral poems, writes of shepherds stretched out under olive trees, drifting off mid-song while their goats graze unbothered nearby. These aren't just lazy tropes. They're reflections of something deeper. That sleep, especially the nap, was sacred. An interruption in a good way, a reminder that even ambition, heartbreak and art need to pause. And, beyond verse, the Greek playwrights leaned into sleep too, sometimes for humour, sometimes for tragedy. In The Birds by Aristophanes, characters pretend to fall asleep to avoid annoying gods. In Hippolytus by Euripides, a servant dozes at the worst possible moment, missing critical drama, classic nap timing. And in Medea, well, let's just say you should never fall asleep around a sorceress with a grudge. You chuckle quietly at the memory, because while naps are usually harmless in literature, they're dramatic pivot points. Sleep changes things. Characters dream secrets, wake to new fates, forget what mattered, or remember what they tried to bury. Even oracles, as we've seen, sometimes speak from dreams. And the poets captured all of it, but they didn't just use sleep as a tool. They also captured what it felt like. Lines about eyelids heavy as dew, about arms slipping from scrolls, about voices fading mid-thought, like fire trailing off into smoke. One poet, Erinna, wrote of falling asleep beside her friend and dreaming they were still young. When she woke, the girl was gone. The nap had become a bridge across memory, soft and brutal all at once. That's the thing the poets understood best. That sleep was both shield and sword. It protected the soul, but also exposed it. And nowhere was this clearer than in the brief midday nap, when the day paused but didn't end, when dreams came but didn't stay, when life hovered between the real and the imagined, and the poets wrote it down. You lean back now on the bench, the young man still reciting softly, though now his words have turned to murmurs. You don't need to hear every line, you feel them, and that's enough, because tonight you've walked through temples and fields, courts and kitchens, harbours and bedrooms, but here, in a courtyard lit by starlight and poetry, you rest, not because you're done, but because you've arrived. You rise from the poet's bench slowly, letting the last syllables of the verse settle behind you like feathers drifting to the ground. The night is deep now, dense and velvety, with only the occasional flicker of torchlight behind shuttered windows. Even the moon has started its descent, dragging its pale light across rooftops like a sleepy hand trailing over bedsheets. You're not ready to sleep yet. Not just yet, because there's still one more place to visit, one more corner of the Greek world where the nap wasn't just a break from activity. It was an act of resistance. Tonight, you head for the hills, literally. You're walking the rocky path toward a small community tucked just beyond the edge of Athenian sprawl. These are not the elite, not the philosophers or generals or marble-polishing poets. These are the workers, the day labourers, the ones who don't own time, they borrow it. And what they do with it might surprise you. Because in a world where most things were dictated, birth, class, citizenship, the nap was one of the few things still theirs. You arrive at a low-slung house, the kind built from sun-dried brick and love. Inside, a woman is stretching out on a mat, one arm across her eyes, the other wrapped loosely around a worn leather sandal that serves as her pillow. Her name is Elpida, and she's spent the morning scrubbing garments by hand for a wealthy household downtown, She has exactly 47 minutes to herself before she needs to start supper and tend to the goats. She's not wasting it, she's napping. This isn't luxury, it's survival. Historians often focus on the aristocratic nap, the soft couches, the perfumed linens, the olives eaten in moderation. But here, in the lower ranks of Greek society, naps were more than comfort. They were a boundary, a small rebellion against fatigue, against schedule, against a world that demanded labor but rarely offered rest. You pass by another small home, this one even humbler, its roof patched with palm fronds and optimism. Inside, a young man snoozes beside his carpentry tools, hands still dusted with sawdust, head tilted against the leg of a half-finished stool. He's not supposed to nap, not technically. His workshop is supposed to stay open during midday, but the sun was loud, his stomach was full, his body had other plans. And so he gave in, quietly, deliberately. This is something modern life often forgets. We're told that rest must be earned, that productivity must precede peace, that naps are for children or the lazy or the overindulgent. But here, in ancient Greece, even the poorest citizens understood something profound. You cannot pour wine from an empty cup, even if the cup is chipped, even if no one else sees its worth. Rest is not weakness. It's the foundation of resilience. And for the working poor, that meant seizing every sliver of time they could. Sometimes that meant a nap in the shade of a well while hauling water. Sometimes it meant dozing off during a lull in fish gutting. Sometimes it meant pretending to look for nails in the corner of a warehouse just so you could lean your forehead against the cool wall and drift for 3 breaths. These naps weren't glamorous, but they were brave. And even slaves, those with no official rights, found ways to rest, in hidden corners, in the lull between chores, in the space between being seen and being forgotten. Historians still argue whether masters tolerated this kind of rest or simply failed to notice it. But fragments of letters, household logs, and rare surviving narratives suggest a surprising truth. Even the enslaved were allowed brief naps, not out of kindness, but practicality. A rested servant performed better. A tired one dropped things. The world, for all its cruelty, still bent, slightly, to the logic of rest. You pass a stable now. Inside, a boy lies curled beside a mule, both of them asleep, chests rising in unison. A wooden bucket sits overturned nearby, a few figs forgotten beside it. Maybe he was feeding the animal, maybe he meant to fetch water. Doesn't matter, he chose rest. The mule didn't object, neither do you, because in this quiet moment, under this ancient sky, you see it. That the nap was not just for the philosophers and priests, it was for the tired girl with blistered hands, the mother who worked 2 markets, the teenage boy who missed his father and didn't know how to say it. Rest belonged to them too, and when they took it, they reminded the world softly but firmly that they were still human, still dreaming, still whole. So as you leave the hillside settlement behind, watching smoke curl from a chimney, you carry that with you. Not guilt, not pity, but respect for every humble nap taken in defiance of exhaustion, for every breath stolen back from the jaws of labor, and for every soul who, despite everything, chose to pause. Even when the world didn't give permission, especially then. The road levels out as you return to the city's edge, and for a moment, Athens stretches before you like a sleeping animal, coiled and content, its streets looping like tails around its temples and homes. You pause, catching your breath, and lean against a wall that still radiates the sun it soaked up earlier in the day. The warmth seeps into your shoulder like a memory. You've seen the philosophers nap, the soldiers, the mothers, merchants, poets and priests. Even slaves and sailors have taken their place beneath the great, slow wave of the midday siesta. But now you glance toward the highest point in the city. It's time to visit the one group whose relationship to sleep is complicated. The watchers, the guards, the sentries, the sleepless, because while the rest of the city drifted between dream and drowsiness, someone had to stay awake. Always. And that's where you're headed, The climb to the Acropolis isn't long, but it's steep. You take your time. The torchlight flickers along the steps. Somewhere below, a baby cries once, just once, and then falls quiet again. The stone beneath your sandals is smooth from centuries of footsteps, some hurried, some ceremonial, some so heavy with exhaustion they barely lifted off the ground. At the summit, you meet him. One of the Scythian archers, a foreign-born public slave trained to guard the city. He's leaning against a column, bow slung casually across his back, fingers drumming against the marble with a rhythm that suggests boredom more than fear. He's not quite asleep, but he's close. And that's the paradox of the ancient Greek watchman, the tension between vigilance and rest. You sit beside him quietly. He doesn't flinch. There's a shared understanding here. It's night. Everyone's tired. Words are optional. And slowly the stories begin to unspool. Not from his lips, he doesn't speak your language, but from the setting itself. Because up here, where the wind moves freely and the city's heartbeat is quieted, you start to notice the infrastructure of sleeplessness, raised platforms, windbreak alcoves, flat stones clearly shaped not just for guarding but for resting while guarding. It wasn't negligence, it was design. Because even the watchman tasked with protecting a city full of napping citizens had to sleep. Somehow. They rotated in shifts, yes, took turns standing, sitting, lying down. A guard might close one eye while keeping the other open. Not ideal, but realistic. In some cities there were even secondary guards, younger apprentices or elderly volunteers who stayed up during the hot hours so the primary guards could rest. Because protecting the city at night meant being alert after the sun went down, which meant, surprise, you had to nap earlier, that's right. Even the guards, the sleepless, had siestas. They just called them something else, maybe the 4th-hour break, maybe pre-evening rest. But to make no mistake, they napped, not because they wanted to, because they had to. There's a scratched line of graffiti on a nearby stone, faint, barely legible. Probably written by a bored sentry sometime in the last 100 years. It says, "Even Ares blinks." You smile, because it's true. Even the god of war needed rest. Even he closed his eyes. Briefly, and if a divine warmonger could nap mid-battle, surely this sleepy archer beside you deserves 5 minutes with his head against a column. Historians still argue whether these moments of rest were officially sanctioned or just tolerated. But there are clues. Some reliefs show guards reclining, not in shame, but in duty. Because to endure the silence of night, to wait through uneventful hours, to stand ready for danger that never comes, it wears on you, slowly, like waves wearing down stone. And so they stole naps when they could, in temples, behind altars, inside guardhouses lit only by coals. There's even a legend, probably more fiction than fact, about a sentry who dreamed of an impending attack, woke in a panic, raised the alarm, and saved an entire village. You won't find it in the history books, but the locals believe it. And that says something, that even the dreams of guards mattered. The nap then was not betrayal of duty. It was part of the duty, a way to stay sharp, a way to not go mad with fatigue, a way to remember that even as you watched over the city, someone needed to watch over you. You glance at the archer beside you now. His head has dropped slightly. His breathing is deep and even. You don't wake him. Instead, you let the moment pass like a cloud across the moon, because in this quiet hour, the city rests, and even its watchers, just for a moment, are allowed to drift. You descend from the Acropolis slowly, each step a gentle hush against the sleeping stones. Behind you, the city's guardian snoozes beneath a sky streaked with stars. Ahead of you, Athens lies fully in the cradle of night, its rooftops dusted in silver, its courtyards still, its people held in the embrace of dreams. But even in this quietest hour, there's one last group we haven't yet visited. You turn toward a winding path, one that slips past temples and homes and workshops, toward the edge of the city, where the marble gives way to dirt, and silence shifts into song. Because not everyone sleeps through the night. Welcome to the world of the insomniacs, the thinkers, the restless, The ones who, for one reason or another, don't nap when they're supposed to or don't sleep at all. Yes, even in ancient Greece, sleeplessness was a thing. Sometimes it was physical. Fever, indigestion, an overambitious cheese platter. Other times it was mental. Grief, worry, a mind that just won't shut up. And sometimes it was chosen, a kind of spiritual rebellion, a deliberate dance with darkness. You find yourself now near a small structure, half temple, half hut. Inside, a man sits cross-legged on the floor, lit only by the orange glow of a dying oil lamp. His eyes are open, but not startled. They stare ahead calmly, as if waiting for something, an idea, a memory, a god. He is a night philosopher, and he's not alone. Because across ancient Greece, especially in the later classical and Hellenistic periods, a curious practice emerged: intentional insomnia, philosophers, mystics, and certain sects choosing to stay awake long after others had given themselves over to hypnos. Why? Because they believed that night held truths that day couldn't reveal. The city, they said, was too loud, the mind too cluttered. But at night, when the hearths were cold and the streets empty, the soul could finally speak without interruption. These men, and the rare but very real women philosophers too, would pace their homes whispering lines from Plato or Pythagoras. They would write poems by moonlight, or simply sit like this man here, listening to wind, to the stars, to something within. And yes, they napped, eventually, but often not until dawn. Plutarch once described a scholar so committed to midnight contemplation that he built a nap nook in his study, not to rest nightly, but to take short, controlled naps throughout the day so he could stay lucid at night, like an owl in a toga. In fact, ancient sleep patterns weren't always our modern 8-hour block. Some scholars believe that many Greeks followed what we now call segmented sleep, 2 main phases with a waking hour in between, often used for prayer, meditation, or a snack. Historians still debate how widespread this was. Was it a quirk of philosophers, or did farmers, mothers, and merchants do it too? Evidence is scattered, but the pattern repeats, carved into tablets, written in passing lines, etched in habits that survived into later Roman times. And the insomniacs? They weren't always serene. Some wandered restlessly, haunted by debts, illness, betrayal. Ancient plays and writings describe characters pacing courtyards, whispering to the gods, or gnawing stale bread in the dark while their families slept. One comedic playwright even invented a character who sued the god of sleep for abandonment, filed it in a dream court, lost, naturally. But it shows just how deeply the Greeks felt the absence of sleep. It wasn't just inconvenient, it was cosmic, a sign something was wrong, a balance disturbed, and so they invented ways to cope. Herbs steeped in wine, lavender tucked into bedclothes, chants murmured under the breath. A popular incantation went, "Sleep, son of night, cradle my mind like a ship in quiet waters." Say it 3 times, close your eyes, hope for the best. But for the thinkers, the sleeplessness wasn't a curse, it was a method. Plato wrote entire dialogues framed as late-night conversations, the symposium being the most famous. A drinking party turned metaphysical masterclass, all set after sunset, drifting toward the dawn. And what's whispered through those hours, that love, beauty, truth, they reveal themselves best when the world has quieted, when the lamps are low, when everyone else is dreaming and you're the only one left awake, tracing the edges of something eternal. Even the Pythagoreans, who famously avoided beans, long story, practiced structured silence and wakefulness. They believed night vigils helped purify the soul, that a few well-placed hours in the dark could connect you to the order of the universe. And isn't that oddly comforting? That even in a world of sandals and scrolls, someone still stared at the ceiling at 3 a.m. wondering what it all means. You sit beside the philosopher now, your back's against the same cool wall. He says nothing, doesn't need to. His silence is complete, not empty. And slowly, without trying to, you start to feel it. The draw of the dark. the way the stars seem to lean in, the way your thoughts drift without anchoring. You're not asleep. Not yet. But you're no longer fully awake either. You're somewhere in between, the same place the Greeks knew well, where sleep isn't a line you cross, it's a shoreline you walk along, and sometimes you just want to stay a little longer listening to the waves. The hours slip past like sand between fingers, soft, soundless, inevitable. You're still seated beside the quiet philosopher, but the sky above has begun its slow fade from deep black to indigo, just a whisper of light along the horizon, the kind of light that doesn't chase the night away, but gently asks it to move over. And something in you shifts too, because after all this wandering, listening, drifting, you're beginning to understand that napping in ancient Greece wasn't a luxury or an accident or even just as a habit. It was a language. And now, just before the world stirs again, you're going to hear one final dialect of that language, spoken not with words but movements, rituals. The graceful rhythm of doing the same thing every day in the same way until the body remembers it better than the mind does. You rise quietly and follow the fading stars back into the city, this time heading to a district many overlook in favor of temples and theatres, the gymnasia, not just gyms, not in the modern, sweat-slicked, treadmill kind of way. In ancient Greece, a gymnasium was part training ground, part school, part spa, part philosophical Starbucks, and woven into its schedule, yes, even among the javelin throws and Socratic debates, was the art of the nap. You slip past the gates into a quiet courtyard. The ground is still damp from someone watering the dust. Olive trees cast long shadows. A few men are stretching silently, their movements more dance than workout, and tucked under a colonnade, you see them. Nap mats, thin rolls of woven wool, folded cloaks, occasionally a small clay pillow shaped to cradle the neck. This was no accident. The daily rhythm of a Greek gymnasium followed a very specific flow. Early morning exercises, light breakfast, intellectual conversation, physical training, and then, always, a midday pause, not just for food, for recovery. Rest was built into the curriculum. One teacher, an old follower of Heraclitus, you're told, insisted that no student could argue well on a tired brain. His rule, no dialectic before dozing, which sounds like a joke, but wasn't. He enforced nap time like it was sacred geometry, and he wasn't alone. The gymnasium wasn't a place to exhaust yourself. It was a place to harmonize body and mind. And naps, they were the tuning fork, the silence between chords, a physical reset that made the next act possible. One athlete, Diocles of Mytilene, reportedly won the wrestling crown at the Nemean Games after a nap so deep his fellow trainees had to poke him with a lyre string to wake him. He stretched, yawned, beat 3 men, and credited excellent pre-bout sleep hygiene for the win. Okay, maybe not in those words, but close. Historians still debate how institutionalized these naps really were. Were they formally scheduled, voluntary, peer-pressured, probably all of the above? But what's undeniable is this: they were normalized. No shame, no apology. Just men, young and old, lying quietly in shaded spaces, trusting that their minds and muscles would thank them later. There's even record of post-nap philosophical sessions where students were encouraged to reflect on dreams or lingering thoughts from that liminal space between waking and sleep. Plato himself wrote that the soul in rest rehearses truth, which sounds deep until you realize he might have just meant you solve problems better after a nap. You walk past one of the mats now. Its occupant stirs slightly, not alarmed, just adjusting, turning his face toward the cool stone. And you suddenly wonder how many ideas, how many theorems, poems, strategies were born not from debate but from that warm hour after lunch when the eyes closed and the world softened. It's beautiful, isn't it? The idea that rest isn't the opposite of effort, but its companion. The other half of the breath, the pause before the next thought. You step outside the gymnasium just as the birds begin to sing. Nothing loud yet, just the warm-up act, one bird, then another, then 1,000, and you realize the city is waking up. Slowly, gently, not with shouts, but with footsteps, not with horns, but with the creak of shutters and the low splash of water being poured into basins. The rhythm begins again, but for now, you stay still, because your rhythm isn't quite done, not yet. There's one more nap to understand, and this time, it's your own. The light has changed. Not fully morning yet, just the soft, powdered grey that comes when night finally sighs and gives up its claim. You're standing at the edge of the city now, where the fields begin again and the stones grow fewer. Somewhere behind you, the first vendors are arranging baskets of olives. A rooster crows twice, as if uncertain. The air is cool, but laced with promise. And you? You're tired. Not just in your limbs, but deep in your chest. The good kind of tired, the earned kind, the kind the ancient Greeks would have respected, because after all we've seen, temples and tents, courts and kitchens, hillsides and harbours, there's one truth that hums through it all like a lullaby beneath history's noise. Rest is not weakness, it's wisdom. And nowhere is that wisdom clearer than in the final nap of the day, the one that comes not out of heat or boredom or digestion, but because the world itself says, enough for now. You walk slowly back toward the olive grove you passed hours ago. The same one where farmers once dozed, where children chased goats into sleep's waiting arms, where dreams curled in the crook of an elbow like a purring cat. And you lie down, not on marble, not on a couch, just here, in the grass that smells faintly of dust and time. The sun hasn't cleared the hills yet. The shadows are long and soft. The breeze runs fingers through your hair like it's known you your whole life. You close your eyes, and suddenly the entire Greek world settles beside you. Socrates snoring softly against a tree stump. A priest of Asclepius halfway through a divine dream prescription. A soldier with one sandal off, clutching his spear like a teddy bear. A baker's apprentice, arm dusted in flour, smile twitching mid-dream. Even Hypnos, god of sleep himself, dips low and lays a fingertip gently on your brow. There's no ceremony to it, no speech. Just a body letting go, and the mind saying, yes. Yes, this is where I stop. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly invented the nap, or merely perfected its branding. But when you listen not to books, but to the silence they left behind, you hear it. 1,000 sighs, 1,000 quiet, just 10 more minutes. 1,000 moments when the world paused and someone allowed themselves to simply be still. And now you're one of them. The last Greek napper of the night, not studying, not arguing, not building, not conquering, just breathing, just here, because even eternity can wait, especially for a nap. And now we drift. The stories have been told, the steps retraced, the temples visited, the rooftops climbed, the olive branches parted to reveal what the ancient Greeks always knew, but never needed to shout, that there is power in pause, that there is courage in stillness, that to rest is to return, not just to energy, but to yourself. Your breath is slower now, your jaw unclenched, your shoulders heavier, but in that comforting way, like the weight of a thick blanket after a long day. Let it all fade now. Let the sun climb without you for a little while. Let the world turn gently on its own. The groves are quiet, the scrolls are closed. The gods, even the rowdy ones, have curled into their corners of the sky and closed their eyes. And you? You're already halfway between the waking and the woven, between the now and the not yet. There's nothing left to understand, no facts to memorize, no names to remember, just that soft, sacred rhythm of in and out, in and out. Sleep doesn't need permission, it only needs space. So let this space be yours. You've wandered far, you've learned quietly. You've listened to history not with the mind, but with the heart. And now you rest, not as escape, but as arrival. Sweet dreams.